701. Dumbledore tricks students. In the dim night, an emerald green light flared suddenly, brighter than the dark mark hanging in the sky. The brilliant beam struck the Death Eater's eyes, making their pupils shrink and their faces go slack with horror, as if they could not believe Snape had dared to act against the Dark Lord. Lord Voldemort, wand in hand, gave a faint scoff. Facing the incoming green light, he slowly raised his wand and used the surging magic at its tip to block the unforgivable curse. The emerald glow froze a few inches from the wand tip. Voldemort had stopped the Avada Kedavra, but instead of relief, his face tightened. The lethal magic clinging to the curse did not cease. It crawled along the wand, cold and dark, unnervingly real. This Avada Kedavra was unlike any he had seen. Besides the raw malice directed at an enemy, it carried a genuine aura of death. That did not mean Snape's mastery outmatched Voldemort's, only that they had chosen different paths. Voldemort's Avada Kedavra let his malice fly free, swift, deadly, almost impossible for even Dumbledore to counter head-on. Snape had folded his understanding of death into the charm. Its ominous aura clung to the spell, making it all the more insidious. No barrier, magical or physical, could fully negate it. The Death Eaters and the watching Harry widened their eyes and unconsciously held their breath. Snape stood expressionless, his cold gaze hiding a fierce intensity. A thin, forked tongue of a smile flickered across Voldemort's face as he dismissed his fleeting surprise. He turned his wand and gently deflected the Avada Kedavra, guiding it upward. The green beam streaked across the sky like a meteor, slicing through the luminous skull and snake of the dark mark as if a blade had cut the emblem in two. After piercing the mark, the light continued straight up for hundreds of feet before slowly dissipating. "Death, foul scent," Voldemort murmured. "But I will forgive you. I'll give you another chance, Severus. Return to my side." "What foul scent?" Snape sneered. "It's the smell of fear, isn't it? Dark arts, Avada Kedavra, Horcruxes, prophecies. Admit it. Everything you've done is out of fear of death, Dark Lord. No, perhaps I should call you Tom Riddle, a coward afraid of death." Voldemort's eyes narrowed, his crimson gaze cut through the night. "Is that your answer?" Fog shifted quietly. The Death Eaters at the back, who had been watching with cruel amusement, felt a chill creep up their spines at the Dark Lord's words. The lawn fell deathly silent. Around them, the grass whispered and dew dripped. Voldemort stood a pace ahead of his followers. Snape had his wand raised and was shielding Harry behind him. When Snape lifted his wand again, Voldemort was quicker. No spoken incantation, only a flick of the wrist, and a green light shot forward. Every duel between legendary wizards offered lessons. Hidden in the bushes, Loren watched with sharp focus, a flicker of excitement at seeing Voldemort's movements and Dumbledore's nearby maneuvers. He was straining to catch every motion that might rescue someone. Strangely, Dumbledore seemed to be glancing at him as well. Loren did not expect that when Voldemort raised his hand to release Avada Kedavra, Dumbledore would suddenly thrust a wand into his palm and shove him out of the bushes. Loren had no time to think. Fingers closing around the wand, he spun and, to the astonishment of everyone, swept it diagonally upward, instinctively casting his best piercing charm. A blazing red streak tore across the night and struck the Avada Kedavra from behind. The hastily cast charm shattered the green beam and then slammed almost unimpeded into the grass beside Voldemort and the Death Eaters, detonating in a thunderous explosion. A deep crater spat white smoke. Clods of earth and torn grass were hurled toward Voldemort, but were scattered by a sudden gust. The other Death Eaters were less fortunate. They were caught in the spray as if in a drenching mudstorm. Loren avoided the worst of it. He summoned a swirl of wind to clear the debris, then glanced toward Snape and Harry. Their eyes met. Snape, understanding that Dumbledore must be nearby, looked even colder. Harry stared in amazement, not only at Loren's sudden appearance, but at the piercing charm itself. Years ago, when Loren had breached an acromantula nest, he had used a piercing charm that had subdued the entire colony. Back then, it had required the Philosopher's Stone to accumulate its power. This time, with only a flick of the wrist, the charm had shattered Voldemort's Avada Kedavra with barely any recoil, left a deep pit, and sent the Death Eaters reeling. The white smoke thinned and the mist reformed. The open lawn no longer hid anyone. "Loren Morgan," Voldemort said, his gloomy gaze sweeping over the empty bushes, then to Loren's face and wand. As a Hogwarts student, wandering outside the castle at night during the Easter holiday is a serious breach of school rules. Did Dumbledore not emphasize that? Loren retorted bluntly. Are you asking whether Dumbledore is here? Voldemort chuckled softly, patient. Loren scanned the cleared bushes. There was no sign of the headmaster, and nothing in his magical sight. He muttered a curse inwardly, but kept his outward composure. Let's make a deal, Voldemort said smoothly. I'll take these two students, who so flagrantly broke school rules, back to Hogwarts. I promise they'll be dealt with severely. You can pretend you didn't see any of this tonight. How does that sound? Voldemort was done wasting time on whether Dumbledore was actually present or on engaging Loren in parley. He shifted his grip on his wand to a proper hold, and a ghostly green light burst from the tip, heading straight for Loren. Loren's pupils narrowed. He had no wish to duel Voldemort one-on-one. He threw a quick misdirection and blinked away from the beam, reappearing to the side and slightly ahead. He drove his wand down, and flames leapt and spread across the lawn. The Death Eater's circle split open. Snape bundled Harry, and they bolted for the forest. Figures flowed after them in pursuit, dozens disappearing through the trees. Loren moved unhindered. He smiled faintly as he manipulated the wand, summoning the fire into living shapes that surged across the grass. Blazes coalesced into birds and beasts, fiery falcons, armored serpents, a broad-shouldered lion, rising hundreds of feet, fierce and snapping, a wild assault. Voldemort abandoned ground tactics and flung back his robes, turning into a black mist to shoot upward, launching spells from the sky. Loren followed, wand clutched tight. Flames and fiery beasts struck at Voldemort, their attack more like a desperate, charging assault than a calculated spell. 702. Me? Fight Voldemort. Green light and flames collided like a grand fireworks display, blooming in a dark sky. The green streak was Avada Kedavra, cast by the most powerful dark wizard in history. The flames were a variant of fiendfire, amplified by an ancient wand. When the two forces met, time seemed to pause for a heartbeat before a storm of chaos erupted. A flaming lion that had been following behind was shredded into motes of light before it could get close. The dazzling blast lit the heavens, dimming the stars and the moon. Below, the abandoned amusement park was the scene of a spectacular magical fireworks show. A spherical shockwave rolled outward from the thunderous collision. Voldemort hung in the air, not falling, but keeping his distance and waiting for the aftereffects to clear. Loren Morgan, he said, voice smooth and cold. You are still an ungraduated student, yet we are no strangers. You have ruined my plans, destroyed my Horcruxes, and still I have never struck you down. When you sought Wormtail's life, I sent my servant to you without hesitation. We need not be enemies. Dumbledore is old. He can no longer stop my magic, so he gave you the Elder Wand to use against me. I value your talent more than he does. I respect your will more than he does. If we unite, we will conquer death itself, rule the world, and unveil all the mysteries of magic. Loren hovered in the air as the magical storm eased and called back, loud enough for the night to hear. Then how about showing some sincerity and telling me where the living Horcrux is? Voldemort's stare went colder. He flicked his wand, and as Loren drifted closer, the tip of his wand pinpointed him. Loren's lips moved before he could think, and the thought of Avada Kedavra rose instinctively. A grim, mountain flood surge of magic flowed from Voldemort. The snakewood wand at his fingertips rasped with a mournful hiss. The green light erupted again, but it didn't shoot straight. Like a coiled viper, it drew back, tensing before it struck. The Avada Kedavra screamed across the night, a cutting sound that felt as if it could bite. To look at it was to feel a prickle on the skin, as though the hiss itself carried venom. The evening breeze lifted Loren, his figure light and agile. The levitation charm he'd improved, amplified by the ancient wand, almost had the quality of an old flying spell. He swept his own wand. The air shivered. Before the green bolt reached him, he flickered. Voldemort hung unhurriedly in midair and made a small, precise motion. The solid, heavy Avada Kedavra in front of him split, exploding into hundreds of thin, snake-like bolts that fell like rain, covering the whole area Loren had just vacated. They were everywhere, relentless and thorough. A spell, once released, could still be guided. Voldemort had learned to do precisely that from his months of experiments in the Department of Mysteries, studying the brains kept in tanks after breaching the Ministry. It was a technique he had planned to unveil to Dumbledore first, until Loren's rapid growth, paired with that strange fiend fire and that odd wand, began to exceed his expectations. Apparition in combat is fast but dangerous. Misjudging distance is easy. Voldemort had expected only short, desperate shifts. He had not expected the combination of spatial magic and the Elder Wand to carry Loren so far. A muffled explosion of air, and Loren reappeared, already above Voldemort, using nothing but the thin, cold air for leverage. He spun, flung himself, and poured his magic into the Elder Wand. The sensation was like a swelling river becoming an ocean. Loren's control was so intense it threatened to spill over. Red and white light seized the sky. Magic rippled at the edges in lightning-like arcs. The air tore with a dense crackling, like 1,000 birds crying at once. At the center, the light fused into a blinding white. Voldemort looked up, his snake-slit pupils narrowed to thin lines against the brightness. The white heart of the spell burned a deep purple-black afterimage into his vision. "Expulso!" Loren shouted. A pillar of reddish-white light dropped with a high, piercing whistle and a deep hum. A thick, prismatic beam struck from sky to ground and slammed into the flat earth of the old park. The ground shuddered. The roar of tearing soil followed. When the light struck, the earth opened into what seemed a bottomless pit. Loren landed, feeling residual warmth against his skin. The surrounding lawn and shrubbery had been reduced to ash by the flames. The earth was charred, clumpy, and in places still molten. Molten rock and soil cooled at the rim into hard gray-black stone, hissing wisps of smoke that merged into a gray haze. Radial cracks, thick at the edge and tapering outward, rippled across the ground like torn flesh. Loren peered into the black hole. He couldn't find any trace of magic. He waited as the world settled. Footsteps sounded beside him. Dumbledore came across the scorched lawn, stroking his beard, eyes oddly pleased. "Do not expect too much, child," he said. "Your expulso struck true, but Voldemort's silver shield held for a moment. He used that moment to escape. Apparating under a powerful spell and far away. If he didn't die, he is badly hurt," Dumbledore added. Loren clicked his tongue in satisfaction, just about to bask in victory when a panic pricked him. He looked up, alarmed. "Why didn't you go help Harry and the others?" Dumbledore considered the question seriously. "This duel was far more dangerous and needed my attention here," he answered. It was a reasonable explanation, and Loren felt a small measure of relief. Dumbledore's calmness suggested things were not yet catastrophic elsewhere. Still, Loren chastised himself for the worry that had seized him. "Childish," he muttered, shaking his head. "He's over 100 years old." Loren waved his wand, and large-scale transfiguration began. The ruined ground smoothed as if a tide flowed over it. Cracks closed, the deep pit collapsed and filled, stones sank into the soil, and fresh earth was turned up to the surface. Patches of green grass pushed out from the undamaged edges and began to spread, restoring a fragment of life to the devastated scene. The battlefield had been cleared. Only a few shrubs were missing. Moonlight poured back across the lawn, silvering the emerald grass and turning the breeze into a quiet, cool caress. Loren, still restless, stopped casting spells and finally had a moment to examine the Elder Wand in his hand, the famous Deathly Hallow. The first thing that struck him was the wand's length. At 15 inches, it was longer than most wands, almost the size of a finely made sword, straight and slim, the shaft a brownish black. 5 wooden knobs were spaced evenly from tip to handle, each one smaller than the last, the whole wand dark and severe. The wood's surface had been oxidized over centuries and polished by generations of wizards. It caught the light with a warm, faint sheen. Rumor had it the wand was elder wood with a thestral tail hair core. Loren rubbed his thumb along it a few times and compared it, mentally, to his own applewood wand. Despite its reputation, the Elder Wand felt rough in his hand. Too many knobs made it awkward to roll between his fingers. It was a fine wand, but not a comfortable one. He twirled it once like a pen, then walked to Dumbledore's side. He paused and asked, "Headmaster, don't you have anything to say to me?" "Don't you have anything to ask me?" Dumbledore replied, calm and unhurried. Loren hesitated, thinking. Dumbledore smiled. His blue eyes swept the lawn. confirming every trace had been covered. Then he turned toward the forest. Loren followed silently, sorting the night's events in his head, trying to separate coincidence from plan. He'd seen Harry out after dark, with Dumbledore following. He'd followed too. At the grass, he'd received Draco's warning. Then Voldemort had arrived with his Death Eaters. At the decisive moment, he'd been pushed forward and, without hesitation, had used the Elder Wand. Accident after accident, coincidence after coincidence, was Dumbledore the architect behind any of it? The more he replayed it, the less certain he felt. He shook his head and asked directly, "Professor, you never seemed to care about the resurrection ritual. Did you know from the start it would fail? Did you expect Voldemort to come and interfere?" "Don't think ill of me, Loren," Dumbledore said gently. "I respect the laws of nature, the order of life and death, but that doesn't mean I reject the thought of Lily's return. I would be glad to see a mother and son reunited. Lily and Harry deserve that." "And what about Professor Snape?" "Since Lily's death, Severus has never truly lived for himself. For more than a decade, his life has been a kind of suffocation under guilt. If he could give his life to bring Lily back, it would be a kind of release for him." Loren exhaled, conflicted. Framed that way, Dumbledore's position made a kind of grim sense. But the ritual failed. Yes, it failed. Perhaps it was an accident. Perhaps the outcome was already fixed. Magic gives us tools to see, but the order of life and death may be harsher than we imagine. They entered the trees, and the moon and stars dimmed behind the canopy. The path was nonetheless clear. Decades of an untouched forest floor was carpeted with leaves, and fresh, deep and shallow footprints marred the soft earth. It was not hard to follow the direction in which the hunters had moved. Dumbledore neither hurried nor dawdled. Loren matched his pace. Putting the question of resurrection aside for the moment, Loren returned to the other puzzling matter. "Why did you put me up against Voldemort?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. "A sudden whim," Dumbledore said as if it were nothing. "I thought you might manage." Merlin's whim, Loren thought inwardly. He remembered the headmaster's office, the contest of fire they'd staged. Back then, the transfer of the Elder Wand's allegiance had taken place. Grindelwald's look at him had been odd, too. He frowned. "That wasn't a whim," he protested. "You planned the Elder Wand's transfer long ago, didn't you?" Dumbledore didn't answer directly. Instead, he tilted his head. "How did it feel, defeating Voldemort with the Elder Wand?" "Not bad," Loren admitted. He hesitated, then added hesitantly, "Maybe you should take the Elder Wand back." The idea of giving up the wand that symbolized unparalleled power, the glory of conquering death, an instrument that had turned every transfer into blood and slaughter since Antioch Peveril, should have been unthinkable. Yet the boy offered it willingly. Dumbledore's smile deepened. The lines on his face softened. The pleasure in his expression outshone even the satisfaction of watching Loren stand down Voldemort. "Loren, your eyes are too clear. Even without legilimency, I can read you." Loren froze and turned his gaze away. Old men, he thought, treasured their dignity. "Do you think," he said, recovering, "that without the Elder Wand I couldn't have faced Voldemort? That you had no choice but to push an underage student into the fray?" "That thought did cross my mind," Dumbledore admitted. "You underestimated an old wizard's experience then. Voldemort's methods tonight were surprising, those tightly sealed killing curses. I'd never seen them like that, and yet the green lights shouldn't have been enough to put me into a deep sleep." Dumbledore's voice was soft. "Loren, neither the Elder Wand nor ingenious new charms are things that add strength from the outside. They're like putting scales on a lion or extra limbs on a snake. They only give temporary advantage. Or like putting wings on a lion or giving several heads to a snake," Loren shot back. "The outcome still depends on the lion's fangs and claws and the snake's venom," Dumbledore replied with a small smile. "What actually let you defeat Voldemort was not the wand, but your abundant, powerful magic, your skill at apparition, and your confidence in the piercing charm." "I still think the Elder Wand was crucial," Loren said. "Then practice," Dumbledore encouraged. "Once you truly master the Elder Wand, you'll understand what I mean." The swirling flames lit the path ahead, and Crucio curses whistled past them. Harry's right hand throbbed painfully. His legs spun under him as he stumbled toward the trees. Snape was half a body ahead, moving with an impossible speed. Harry had never realized how long the professor's legs were. Glancing back, he saw Bellatrix close behind, her face twisted by the effort of sprinting and chanting. Harry inwardly hoped she'd run out of breath and trip, acting as a speed bump for the Death Eaters behind her. "You run ahead. I'll hold the charms," Snape said. "All right, Professor." Harry was winded and barely able to cast, so he didn't try to sound brave. "Professor, are we really leaving Loren to face Voldemort alone? Shouldn't we go back?" "Don't be foolish." Snape's voice was sharp. "Going back is impossible, and even if Loren tried to help, he'd just be dead weight." Snape flicked his wand, and invisible blades and a dark green light spat out. Their power was blunted by haste, but the formless blades still nicked throats and wrists. They put one or two Death Eaters out of the pursuit. Snape's modified Avada Kedavra was stranger still, blocked and shattered by other charms. It left a malignant after-effect that made some of the attackers hesitate. Not all the Death Eaters were like Bellatrix. Lucius and Old Knot, among others, were casting spells wildly from the rear, blasting branches more than people. For a while, one wand against dozens had the upper hand, and the gap between them began to widen. Then a brilliant red flare erupted behind them, cutting through the trees and lighting the way forward. A thunderous boom rolled through the ground. Harry halted mid-breath. Snape also stopped, his face going very serious. A rainbow afterimage sheeted across the sky and began to fade. The Death Eaters behind them saw it too, and a series of popping airbursts sounded through the woods. Apparition noises Harry knew all too well. "Why did they apparate away?" he asked, bewildered. "Because Voldemort is calling them in," Snape said. He stared into the distance, his left hand pressed against the outside of his right forearm where the black mark burned hot. "The battle is over." Harry's eyes widened. "Then Loren." Snape shot him an insolent look. "If Loren were the one in trouble, Voldemort would be chasing us. The fact that he's summoning the Death Eaters back can only mean he himself is in trouble." The words landed like ice. Harry's first instinct was to resent Snape's tone, then to hope. "Loren defeated Voldemort?" he blurted. "Dumbledore was there as well," Snape said flatly. "Dumbledore? You don't think only Loren saw you leave the castle, do you?" Without the pursuit, they stopped running and caught their breath. Snape said nothing while Harry inhaled until his breathing slowed. He found himself looking at the gray streak in Snape's hair. The years of aversion, everything that had grown between them, seemed to dissolve. When had it started to change? When he learned the Half-Blood Prince was Snape? When he'd seen Snape raise his wand against Voldemort? Or when Snape had told him to run? Harry didn't know. He only knew he wanted to speak. "Professor, about the resurrection ritual. I'll begin the preparations again." Snape tried to keep his voice level, but it wavered. They sat in the hush of the woods. After a few minutes, footsteps rustled nearby and two figures stepped out from the trees. There was nothing obvious on their clothing or bodies to show they'd just been in one of the great battles of the age, but the way they carried themselves made the victory clear. After a year, Loren finally stood face to face with Snape. Snape's hair had gone streaked with gray, but still lay greasy. His expression was blank and calm, like the surface of the Black Lake, eerily still. Moonlight filtered through the leaves and slanted across the clearing, and where it fell behind Dumbledore, his shadow stretched long and wide, falling over Snape like a stage metaphor, an old man's shadow dragging someone into darkness. "Severus," Dumbledore said softly. Snape's eyes flicked toward him. "Perhaps you should speak to her," Dumbledore added. "Who?" Snape asked. "Lily." The mention of her name made Snape look up. Dumbledore's right hand slipped into his sleeve and came out with a black gemstone resting in his open palm. There was a hairline crack through the stone, and an engraved symbol, triangle and circle bisected by a line, stared up at him. The sign was from the Tales of Beetle the Bard. The Deathly Hallows swam into Snape's mind. The black stone seemed to draw them together. "Summon the dead," Snape whispered. He held his breath and then, against 1,000 small fears, reached out. For a long moment, he didn't move, weighing everything. He glanced toward Harry. So close, the last time Harry had acted as the conduit for a ritual, memories passed through him too, but then Snape set his jaw. If he couldn't win Lily's forgiveness, he would be selfish one last time. He wrapped his fingers around the cool stone and turned it 3 times. A clear, cold breeze moved through the clearing. Leaves and debris rustled on the forest floor. Moonlight, as if pulled by an unseen hand, gathered and folded toward him, coalescing into a soft, solid form. Snape's lips trembled. The sound choked off before it became a full name. Lily approached, no longer insubstantial. Her hair fell back as she tucked it behind one ear. She was gentle and real, her green eyes clear and bright. Harry felt his mouth go dry, lips pressed together. He couldn't force a sound. He stared as if the sight might vanish if blinked. Dumbledore touched Loren's shoulder and gave him a look. Loren understood at once, nodded, and quietly stepped aside with Dumbledore, leaving the space between Snape and Lily private. Lily. Snape stood motionless, his robes hanging to the ground like a figure from a tragic sculpture, his voice fading as if echoing through a valley. Harry said nothing, content to stand and look at her as if he might never tire of the sight. Loren and Dumbledore had stepped some distance away. From there, they could only make out the three figures, unable to hear clearly. The night wind moved the clouds aside, and the moonlit forest was unusually still. Severus, after graduation, I didn't think we'd ever see each other again. Lily glowed faintly, silver in the moonlight. She looked at the childhood friend who had opened the door of magic for her with eyes free of resentment, a soft nostalgia on her face. How long has it been since we had a proper talk? Snape's lips moved, but no sound came. Maybe he couldn't remember, or maybe he didn't want to answer. You look more settled, Lily said, narrowing her eyes. Her voice was gentle. When we left school, you were mixed up with the Death Eaters. I worried you would be swallowed by the dark arts and become some withdrawn, bitter wizard. Harry agreed silently. The description fit. Snape's voice was husky when he spoke. I became the potions professor at Hogwarts. That's good. Lily's voice floated on the breeze. I wanted to teach potions too once. The professor told me I was too young and that I should see the world first. I never reapplied. I suppose it's nice you got to do it. Harry's grades? Lily asked almost casually. Snape hesitated, then, ordinary. Harry opened his mouth to protest, but thinking of his report card stole his confidence. Lily laughed softly. He didn't take after your talent for potions? What a pity. He's got an aptitude for charms and Quidditch. Charms and Quidditch, eh? Lily smiled, then sighed calmly. Sounds like his father. And in character, too. Then you must have had a hard time. Lily's laugh came like sunlight through trees. She narrowed her eyes into crescents, her long hair stirring. She spoke with the easy warmth of an old friend reunited after years apart, entirely unfazed by the fact that the man before her had been involved in the events that led to her death and her husband's. The idea of you two is almost amusing. You were always so awkward, yet you watched over Harry and protected him. There must have been so many misunderstandings and jokes. Snape began to recount those years, memory breaking through like a dam. His voice grew rougher, raw with old hurt, until finally he choked and could not go on. He stared at her, lips trembling. If it hadn't been for me, Voldemort wouldn't have learned the prophecy. He wouldn't have focused on you. You wouldn't have died. You could have raised him yourself instead of... His words cracked. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. After decades of silence, the words poured out. The potions master tore down what pride he had left and confessed his guilt to the woman he had once bullied and now worshipped, speaking both to a victim and to himself. It's all right. I forgive you. Lily's voice was quiet, almost helpless, as if remembering the boy who once emerged from behind bushes in his mother's ill-fitting sweater. He had changed his clothes, but not his sense of inferiority, and that weight had pushed him down painful paths. Snape's apologies kept tumbling out, frantic and stubborn, promises to remake the resurrection ritual, to fix the wrongs. I'll, he stammered until Lily raised her voice slightly, the old Gryffindor firmness showing through. Enough. She reached out as if to wipe his tears. Her hand passed through his physical form, soul through flesh, and for a moment vanity and guilt warred across his face. Lily seemed to sigh with relief. What resurrection, what exchange of lives, so foolish. I don't understand why Dumbledore let you go on. He's getting senile. Snape pressed his lips together. Let it be. Leave the resurrection stone. Give it to Harry. Go find Dumbledore. I want to be alone with him for a while. Lily turned to her son. Harry still looked dazed. stunned by the impossible sight of his mother. A pale light caught in Snape's eyes, and he handed the black gem over. Harry took it, clumsy and amazed. As the stone passed into his hand, Lily's spirit shimmered. Snape began to walk back toward the others. Behind him, he could hear the soft, intimate notes of mother and son catching up, familiar, small talk that made him step lightly. "Don't even think of trying to bring me back," Lily told Harry. "If I came back, what would happen to your father? That year, it was complicated. It wasn't only Severus's fault. If he hadn't warned Voldemort, the prophecy would have played out differently, but it would still have happened. And if it really bothers you, make him pay. He won't retaliate." Snape faltered, as if he could not bear to listen, but he kept walking. The voices behind him faded into the night. Loren stole a glance at Snape, searching for red eyes or tear tracks in the dimness. The distance and the darkness made it impossible to tell. When Snape came up beside them, his face hardened. He put on the practiced mask of cold indifference. "Did you two team up to defeat Voldemort just now?" he asked. Dumbledore smiled. "Correction, not us, Loren." Snape raised an eyebrow, suppressing surprise. "And the Horcruxes? We've destroyed 5. Voldemort's soul has been fragmented too often already. Only one living Horcrux remains." Dumbledore gave a brief summary of the state of affairs. "There have been rumors about the Serpent Wood at Ilvermorny. I intend to visit Mount Greylock over the summer." "The Horcruxes he hid won't be found easily," Snape said skeptically. Dumbledore chuckled softly. "If it's not at Ilvermorny, then I shall search elsewhere. When I retire, perhaps, and travel a little." Snape frowned. He did not believe that was Dumbledore's real plan. He asked finally, quietly, "What about Harry?" Lily would give him his answer, Dumbledore said, the same answer she had offered Severus. Snape was left with that, and the memory of the two of them under the moon, one living and one a thing between worlds, talking as if the intervening years could be folded away in a single conversation. 706. Under the broad cedar, the young wizard, taller now, but with a face that still looked a little boyish, sat down. Mist and sweat had dampened his hair, and it clung in messy strands to his forehead. He sat before his mother, and in a low voice began to tell her about the years he'd lived under the Dursleys' roof. Uncle Vernon's scolding, Cousin Dudley's bullying, Aunt Marge's cruelty, the vicious dog that gnashed and guarded the tree all afternoon. Harry tried to make his account calm, even wry, as if humor could soften every wound. But his mother's steady, gentle gaze was like an undercurrent, stirring memories that had lain at the bottom of a lake until everything surfaced. In the presence of people who loved him, Dumbledore, Sirius, Mr. and Mrs. Weasley, Harry had always appeared strong. Sitting before his mother, he was simply the child who had suffered. His attempts at light banter faltered. He suddenly realized that the things he had told himself he had moved beyond still stung when he let himself think of them. Warm, damp tracks ran down his cheeks. He touched them and felt tears. Lily's eyes were full of pain. She reached out to wipe his tears, but her slender, moonlight-formed fingers could touch nothing. She repeated the soft, comforting phrases of a mother, hoping to offer some small consolation. Her quiet reassurances smoothed and warmed Harry's heart. He sniffed, wiped his face, and began to talk about his new life. "A Hogwarts letter was sent to Privet Drive, and Uncle Vernon kept preventing me from signing for it, so Hagrid came and knocked." He spoke of the honest Hagrid, the red-haired Weasleys, prank-loving classmates, and professors who cared for him, of being chosen for the Quidditch team, sneaking into the restricted section at midnight, encountering a centaur in the Forbidden Forest on a nocturnal stroll, and setting Snape's robes on fire. He had boarded the Scarlet train to the castle and met so many people, so many good things and some bad, mostly good. When he recounted those moments, Harry smiled easily. Lily watched him as if she could not get enough. The evening breeze nudged the clouds and the forest branches swayed. Dim moonlight painted silhouettes of trees and figures, while mother and son spoke in hushed tones. When he mentioned the Quidditch match a few weeks ago and the girl he'd played with, Harry's mouth went dry and his throat tightened. He paused, searching for something clever to say, and came up empty. Impatience flickered across his face. Lily said softly, "We are so happy to know you are well." "You?" he asked, "and your father?" Harry's lips trembled. His voice was barely a whisper. He felt the moment of parting approaching. Don't go. Don't leave me. We will always be with you until the very end. Harry, my brave child, we will meet again, Lily said with a smile. She opened her arms as if to embrace him, then bent and kissed his forehead. Harry closed his eyes as if he truly felt his mother's lips, a faint coolness that somehow brought a deep warmth and peace. A gentle breeze stirred, and the condensed moonlight began to disperse. Silvery motes drifted on the wind, slowly fading and floating away. Loren and the others watched quietly from a distance. The boy under the tree looked like a lost young animal. After a time, Harry rose and walked back to the group. The tears at the corners of his eyes were not yet dry. His eyes and nose were pink-rimmed. He reluctantly handed the resurrection stone back to Dumbledore. Dumbledore slipped the black gem into his pocket and murmured, "It's time to go and get some sleep. Come now. Horace will be glad to see you. He always complains that he's too old to keep up with the current teaching load. I will not be returning to school." Snape's voice cut across the conversation. They all turned. Snape stood still for a moment, then met their looks and shook his head. "I want to rest for a while." "Have you decided where you'll go?" "Not yet." "Will you leave Britain?" "Probably. I want to see other places." "Don't go back to Spinner's End. Lord Voldemort is badly hurt and will be recovering. He may send Death Eaters after you." Dumbledore paused, then added, "If you haven't chosen, why not go to Ilvermorny? Check on that Snakewood for me." "All right." Snape's answer was curt. "If you've rested enough, you're always welcome back. Hogwarts will need a potions professor who's younger," Dumbledore said, his eyes narrowing into a gentle smile. "Have a pleasant journey, Severus." "Have a pleasant journey, Professor Snape," Harry said quietly. Snape replied. Loren blinked, glanced at Harry, and then at the professor, and met Snape's stern gaze. He smoothed his expression. The man could be intimidating. Sincerely, he added, "Have a pleasant journey, Professor." Snape cast him a sideways look, sneered, and turned away. He no longer walked as solitary as before. His steps were less heavy. He slipped into the shadowed trees and went off in a direction different from the one they had taken in. When he had gone far enough that they could no longer see him, Harry asked softly, "Why doesn't Professor Snape want to go back to Hogwarts?" "I'm not certain," Dumbledore said. "Perhaps he feels lost." "Lost?" "For many years he walked a path arranged by others. Now there is no one directing him. He must find his own way." Loren considered this in silence. Harry looked thoughtful too, clearly not fully understanding. Dumbledore put his hands on both of their shoulders. The phoenix's flame winked and was gone, and the forest settled back into its usual quiet. Back at the castle, paying no heed to the hesitant expressions of his two students, Dumbledore climbed the spiral staircase and pushed open the headmaster's office door. He found Grindelwald sitting casually atop the desk, picking up a teapot and pouring steaming cocoa. "Gellert, I didn't see you after the Death Eaters withdrew. I thought you'd gone back to sleep," Dumbledore said. Grindelwald fixed him with a look, then poured with exaggerated care. "I can guess the script that follows, a cascade of confessions and tears. It's all rather dull and tedious." "I find it moving," Dumbledore replied. "Tell me about the battle," Grindelwald said. "It's time to rest. I'll tell you after I wake," Dumbledore answered. "Sleep?" Grindelwald scoffed. "The magic you used was visible to half of London. Do you think the Ministry didn't see it? You won't have a peaceful night for some days." "All the more reason for me to seize the time and sleep now," Dumbledore said. Outside the window, a pale hint of dawn was already brightening the eastern sky. It was nearly light. 7:07. Experiences of staying up late early morning. Loren finished washing up, changed into his pajamas, pulled the quilt up under his arms, and closed his eyes to relax, preparing to sleep. Then he suddenly remembered Hermione and took out his communicator to send her a message. He closed his eyes again and tried to drift off. He had been up almost all night. His head felt a little fuzzy and exhausted, but his mind was unusually clear and oddly excited. Alone in the dark, he kept replaying last night, the interrupted resurrection ceremony, Professor Snape and Lord Voldemort tearing off their masks, Dumbledore handing him the Elder Wand, and his victory over the most powerful dark wizard in history. After tonight, everything in the wizarding world had shifted. With his eyes shut, he pictured Snape's ritual, the silver light and white mist coalescing into a hazy vision, Voldemort leading the Death Eaters into the mist, the dark mark floating vivid and green before shattering into a rain of Avada Kedavra. In his fogged recall, he even glimpsed Harry sobbing his heart out. Strange images blurred together. He hoped he wouldn't have nightmares. He was almost asleep when a niggling worry made him turn to avoid lying on his left side. He remembered that might put pressure on his heart. Drowsily, he shifted, and this time he finally began to feel truly tired. A chirping buzz came from the communicator. He squinted at the dim screen and read Hermione's messages sliding across it, one after another. "Are you still awake, Loren? I know, you want to use the Resurrection Stone. We've both had similar experiences. Do you think there's another world after death? What is it like? Will we go to the same place when we die? Will we ever be reunited with them?" "We will, my mother said so." Loren didn't reply. He turned over again, settling into a left-side position despite his earlier worry. The after effects of an all-nighter made sleep restless. He drifted into a dream in which the dormitory window stood open, curtains and mosquito netting flapping away. Mosquitoes streamed in and buzzed around his ears without letting up, annoying as anything. Near noon, something furry brushed his face and nose. When he didn't react, the animal crawled onto his chest like a warm, solid weight, making it a little hard to breathe. He opened his eyes to find an odd, persimmon-faced creature sitting on him, looking ridiculous. When it saw him awake, it hopped down, planted itself by his pillow, and stared at him, its long ginger tail swishing. "Crookshanks?" Loren mumbled. He was still half asleep. The cat meowed as if to say, all right, I know Hermione sent me to wake you." Loren reached out, hugged Crookshanks, trying to keep the soft ball of fur and lie in bed a little longer. The cat squirmed like liquid, slipped out of his arms, and hopped off the bed to sit obediently by his slippers, mewing for attention. When he finally got up and stretched, the dorm was quiet. Apart from Harry, his roommates weren't there. They had thoughtfully shut the windows before leaving so the bright daylight wouldn't disturb anyone. Crookshanks darted off to report back, and Loren made his way to the washroom. Outside, sunlight bathed the school. Hermione was waiting by the table with a sandwich assembled and an open jar of orange marmalade. "You caught up on sleep this morning, so don't sleep this afternoon," she said in a soft, admonishing voice as she handed him the sandwich. "If you sleep too long in the afternoon, you'll have trouble falling asleep at night. Insomnia leads to staying up late, and staying up late means sleeping in the next day, and your whole rhythm gets thrown off. Keep a little sleepiness and go to bed early tonight." Loren yawned and took the sandwich. "Dr. Granger knows everything," he teased. "Did you stay up late reading a lot and gain experience?" "At least I don't stay up all night." "That's because I forgot to call you last night." He took a bite, then shook his head with mock regret. "Too bad. You missed not only last night's adventure, but also my heroic pose. Professor Snape's ritual opened a hazy vision. There was the most spectacular duel of the century between me and Lord Voldemort, Snape's real feelings, and Harry crying his eyes out. I should find a way to record the scenes from my memory and play them at Harry and Ginny's wedding." Hermione still seemed incredulous as she eyed the long, ancient wand at his hand. "This is the legendary Elder Wand? It really helped you beat Lord Voldemort? Here, try something." Loren picked up the Elder Wand, tapped the green apple on the table, and pushed it toward her. "Taste it." Hermione looked wary for a moment. She expected a prank, but curiosity won. The apple was cool from washing, bright green with a few droplets still clinging to the skin. When she brought it to her nose, she frowned. It smelled not of apple, but of orange peel, sharp and citrusy. Her eyes lit up, and she took a small bite. It was crisp and juicy like an apple, but the flavor was pure, sweet orange. Hermione's mind went to work instantly. Pfft! She almost laughed at the unexpectedness, then considered the magic involved. It must be an advanced transfiguration application. Most food transfiguration changes appearance, smell, and taste wholesale. Water to wine, milk to juice, bread to ham. But this apple retained its apple texture and look, while only its smell and taste were altered. That wasn't merely skillful transfiguration. It was pushing the art into a different realm, like moving from macroscopic physics to quantum phenomena. "Isn't it amazing?" Loren asked. It is, she admitted. After a moment, she asked thoughtfully, is this a general technique, or can only the Elder Wand do it? Loren broke the apple in half, handed her one piece, and kept the other. Right now, it seems only possible with the Elder Wand. Once I'm more familiar with it, maybe I can analyze the principles and figure out the technique. I just got the wand, so I don't fully understand it yet. I'll ask Dumbledore when I have time. Hermione glanced around the Great Hall. Where are Harry and the headmaster? Harry's still sleeping, Loren said. As for the headmaster, he nodded toward the aurors by the entrance. He's probably dealing with Minister Scrimgeour in his office. Loren bit into the apple again. The taste was pleasing, the texture exactly what he expected, but together, apple that tasted of orange, it felt curiously strange. 7:08, a spring rain. In the headmaster's office, the lazy phoenix perched on the windowsill, eyes narrowed to slits, sometimes watching the grounds and sometimes watching the two men talking. The portraits of past headmasters rested quietly in their frames, hands folded, faces calm and kindly. Steam rose from an exquisite porcelain teacup. Even the silverware on the table sent off a warm haze. The vapor was soothing. Scrimgeour took a few deep breaths. His foggy, sleepless mind cleared a little, and the aching in his body eased. Dumbledore, in crescent-shaped spectacles and a pale blue nightgown embroidered with stars and moons, leaned back in his chair, the silk soft and flowing. You must give me an explanation, Albus. Scrimgeour lifted his teacup and drank deeply, exhaling slowly. Muggle universities and several geological institutes detected abnormal fluctuations. People in nearby towns reported tremors. At least a few hundred people saw beams of light in the sky. The Muggle government is planning a special investigation. My staff were called out in the night and haven't had a break since. Calm down, Rufus. Dumbledore added sugar to his cup with leisurely elegance, dropping in 4 or 5 lumps before stirring patiently. Regarding last night, he said, I have good news and bad news. Which would you like first? Albus Dumbledore, I do not have time for riddles. All right, I hope the good news will cheer you. He continued stirring at an unhurried pace. You can reclaim the ministry. What? Scrimgeour leapt up, eyes bloodshot, astonished and almost unable to speak. Since the fall of the ministry and his forced exile, he had been under unheard-of pressure, organizing what forces remained, keeping order, handling international affairs single-handedly. For months, he'd been living on strong tea and later, wakefulness potion. The prisoner exchange affair had only worsened the scrutiny on him. The temporary headquarters received daily complaint letters, and the Wizengamot had nearly impeached him. The news that they might get the building back was almost too much. What exactly happened last night? Why can we reclaim the ministry? Has Voldemort fallen again? The bad news comes next. What bad news? Dumbledore tapped his silver spoon against the rim of the cup with a refined little sound, then took a measured sip. Scrimgeour's heart did a nervous flutter. It felt as if a nest of acromantula were scurrying in his chest. He ground his teeth, wishing he could grab the cup and force Dumbledore into speaking. The tea's warmth soothed him a little. Dumbledore sighed, then looked up at Scrimgeour's wide, red-rimmed eyes and raised an eyebrow. Rufus, as Minister for Magic, especially at a time like this, you should try to remain calm. Scrimgeour's brow knitted like a snarling lion's. Dumbledore smiled faintly. The bad news is that Lord Voldemort is not dead. He is alive, badly injured and recuperating, but he will recover. So, Scrimgeour's nostrils flared and his breath came ragged. So last night you dueled Voldemort and defeated him without a scratch. Someone did defeat Lord Voldemort, Dumbledore said, but I'm afraid I cannot reveal the victor's name without their consent. Why? Scrimgeour was bewildered. Albus, I bear him no ill will. The magical world needs powerful wizards. The ministry could cooperate. This could bring him honor, money, power. From what I know of him, he wouldn't care for those things. Dumbledore's gaze drooped and deepened. Rufus remembered a different man when they'd met that summer at St. Mungo's. The Auror head willing to believe him. Power had changed him. Could it be Grindelwald? Rufus asked. Gellert would not conceal his name, nor would he claim another's victory, Dumbledore said. Rufus paced anxiously in front of the table under the watchful eyes of past headmasters and finally slumped back into his chair. All right, I'll respect your choice, but tell me, what actually happened last night? I'm sorry. Dumbledore said, taking another quiet sip. He was not forthcoming. Scrimgeour stared at him, then snapped, "Then what can I know? Albus, you're going too far." "I'm sorry," Dumbledore repeated, sincere but unhelpful. Scrimgeour only grew angrier, his breathing ragged again. "At least tell me, if Voldemort reappears, will this mystery wizard help us?" "Probably," Dumbledore replied. Silenced, Scrimgeour left Hogwarts with an indignant expression. Dumbledore later told the deputy head it had been a pleasant conversation. By the Black Lake, the Easter holidays were drawing to a close. The sky was a flat, gray-white, low clouds like a heavy quilt, Hogwarts weather in early spring, the calm before the pre-summer rains. Students savored the stillness, scattered across the grounds and along the lake. Hermione and Loren sat under a beech tree by the water, discussing wands. The Elder Wand behaved differently from ordinary wands, not only in looks, but in practical use. Its effects varied even for those not acknowledged as its true master. Hermione, for all she lacked its allegiance, could still coax some of its power, if with less finesse. "Bluebell flames," Hermione murmured, holding the overlong wand at the air. A stream of silky blue fire poured forth, not in separate tongues, but as a steady flow that circled her in rings, the soft light warming her cheeks. Her eyes sparkled. She slowed the flow and traced the wand tip in a gentle circle. Under Transfiguration, the flames coalesced into a glowing, warm ball. Orchideus. The fire burst into blinding light and bloomed into a bouquet which landed in her hand. Hermione smiled and handed the flowers to Loren. "Here." "You're quite romantic, Miss Granger," Loren said. After trying Transfiguration and ordinary charms, she ran through a few minor jinxes and weaker dark arts spells, experimenting on a handful of wilted flowers and a couple of dead fish. Plant and animal rights activists would have been outraged. Sitting back against the tree, Hermione took out her notebook and wrote as she spoke. "The Elder Wand can enhance many kinds of magic, but the caster's will matters most. The effects depend on the wizard's power and precision." "Blah, blah, blah," Loren teased. She playfully punched him. Hermione's quill scratched across the paper. She was curious about the legendary Deathly Hallows, but knew enough to stop before wand lore and wand making. Materials and cores were beyond her current expertise. She finished her notes, slipped them into her pendant, and leaned against the trunk, head tilted toward Loren. A few strands of hair fell into his hand, and he twirled them around his fingers. "Loren, do you have a feeling?" she asked. "What feeling?" "It's so easy all of a sudden. The sense of crisis is gone. Voldemort and the Death Eaters, who were always in the back of my mind. Poof, they're gone." "No, my heart has only you," Loren said, gesturing at the bouquet. Hermione rolled her eyes. A soft breeze skimmed the grass and rippled the lake. A spring rain was coming. The couple walked back to the castle hand in hand before the rain set in. Hermione had to find Professor Burbage to revise an essay, so Loren headed to the common room alone. At the portrait door, he asked about the fat lady's health and ended up chatting. 10 minutes later, he slipped into the common room where a small round table by the window held several familiar faces. Harry sat alone on one side. Ron and Seamus sat opposite, hunched over homework, quills flying in a blur. Loren set the flowers down and glanced at their parchments. It was a tricky defense against the dark arts essay. "Why is it just you two doing homework?" he asked. "Harry gave up," Ron said. "He tossed something together, plans to get a low mark and take the yelling. We, however, have aspirations." "Aspirations for what?" Loren asked. "Excellence, of course. Your excellent essay looks ambitious." "I looked up a lot." "Then what does Peachside mean?" Loren pointed. Ron glanced, smudged an ink blot, and corrected it. "That's misspelled. It should be provocation." Professor Bagshot was kind and old-fashioned. A blot or two would be forgiven. Loren pointed to another spot. "And this ancient 10? Misspelled again. That should be divination." And here. Loren kept pointing, finally landing on the signature. "When did you start signing as Ron Bird Weasley?" Ron sucked in a breath. One blot was forgivable. An essay full of errors was an attitude problem. "Oh no, Fred and George's spell-checking quill is broken," he wailed, staring at his writing in horror. "I'm not going to have to copy the whole thing again, am I?" Seamus checked his own brand-new quill with relief. He hadn't been struck, and feigned sympathy for Ron while visibly enjoying the spectacle. "Don't worry, Ron. The essay isn't due until Tuesday. You have time. What are you laughing at? Don't forget, your quill broke yesterday and you borrowed mine for Transfiguration. Loren sat quietly, not getting drawn into their bickering. He watched as they calculated how many pages needed rewriting. Outside, the rain had started to fall harder. Then he noticed Harry, who'd been quiet the whole time, and prodded him. Harry, what's wrong? Harry blinked, unfocused for a moment. I miss my mother. That's normal after what you've been through, Loren said without a joke. If it's hard, take out her photo, or go and see Professor Lupin or Dumbledore. Don't just brood. I know, Harry's gaze drifted, but when I'm idle I keep seeing that night, what my mother said. She said we'd see each other again. What does that mean? Will we see her again? When? Where? Loren hesitated. You should ask Dumbledore. Even if you don't get an answer, ask about the resurrection stone while you're there. Harry's eyes brightened, then dimmed. Dumbledore won't agree. Just try. If it doesn't work, at least grab some biscuits and sweets. Better than sitting here. All right. After a long pause, Harry rose and headed for the portrait hole. Loren leaned back, sniffed the flowers, and smiled to himself. Push him to Dumbledore this time, to Ginny next time, and have Ron take him to Quidditch practice afterward. Distraction, artfully applied. Seamus, overhearing scraps of conversation, was itching with curiosity. He'd heard that Loren and Harry had been out all night on Easter and couldn't rise the next morning, but he didn't know any details. What had happened that night? What was the resurrection stone? He felt like Madame Norris was scratching at his heart. He needed an adventure story, and soon. 709, Development of Events. Harry stood before the monstrous statue, guessing at a password that began with hazelnut chocolate. He rattled off the names of more than a dozen sweets before the statue split open and revealed the entrance. He wasn't sure which word had worked, but he stepped onto the spiral staircase. Thump, thump, thump. Come in. Dumbledore opened the door to the headmaster's office in a bathrobe, his untamed beard tucked into a cloth bag. He looked as amiable as ever. Ah, Harry, what brings you here so late? Harry didn't know what to say. He walked in slowly, sat at the desk, watched the headmaster pour honey tea, and then haltingly said, Sir, about that night. Go on. Harry paused, meeting those deep, clear blue eyes and gathering himself to whisper, I want to see my mother again. Could you lend me the resurrection stone? I'm sorry, Harry. Forgive me, but I cannot grant that request. Why? The resurrection stone cannot truly bring the dead back. Do you remember the tale of the three brothers? The pain of having someone close but being unable to reach them can drive a person mad, and you have already known that kind of hurt. Dumbledore sighed softly, watching the steam rise from his cup as if he, too, understood the ache. Harry fell silent. The image of that moonlit figure rose in his mind, and his scar prickled. If he could feel his mother's kiss again, he would give anything. The portraits along the wall had dozed, though if one looked closely, old headmaster Phineas Nigellus Black's eyes were only half closed, occasionally opening to glance at Harry. On a shelf, Fawkes was curled inside the Sorting Hat's hollow, his dark, bright eyes blinking. Dumbledore went on. Although I have never seen whatever lies beyond, I sometimes wonder, if such a place exists, does the resurrection stone, in summoning the dead to comfort the living, not also disturb them? Harry held his cup of tea without speaking. But Dumbledore's words lifted him a little, and Harry looked up, hope brightening him like a frightened animal. I understand how you feel. Longing is like a furnace. A brief reunion is kindling and oil. You are burning now. Harry looked at him expectantly. Perhaps I can lend you something else that may bring comfort. What? The Mirror of Erised. Dumbledore motioned to the inner room. A tall, impressive mirror floated out, its golden frame carved with ornate patterns and two clawed feet supporting it at the base. Harry glanced over. Standing slightly to the side, he could only see an ordinary room reflected. He then read the inscription, and committing it to memory, turned it over in his head. I show people what their heart most deeply desires. Harry looked at Dumbledore with a complicated expression. But, yes, I once said it was pointless to dwell on phantoms. Dumbledore regarded the boy who had, unseen, grown taller. But you are not the child you were in your first year. I believe you can tell dream from reality now, and you won't miss Quidditch training for the mirror again. Harry felt a little embarrassed. He resisted the urge to stand directly in front of it, put the mirror of Erised into his storage scales, and pretended to be calm as he lifted his cup and took a sip. Dumbledore noticed his twitching eyebrows and, without exposing him, chuckled. There's still time before lights out. It's a good moment for me to speak with you about Lord Voldemort and the Horcruxes. The snake wood from Ilvermorny? Harry asked. Severus has already set off for Massachusetts, Dumbledore said, but I do not mean that wood. I mean the other Horcruxes. Harry's confusion returned. Slughorn's recovered memory had told them Voldemort split his soul into 7 parts, the main piece and 6 Horcruxes, 5 of which had been destroyed. Are there more Horcruxes? He asked. Dumbledore didn't answer directly. He explained the nature of Horcruxes. Creating one requires splitting the soul. That, in turn, requires the creator to commit murder with intent and without remorse. The violent act fractures the soul. Then a ritual can take a fragment and embed it in an object. Lord Voldemort made several Horcruxes, repeatedly taking pieces like pulling beams from a Jenga tower. Souls are finite. His soul is now precarious. Do you understand what that means? Harry frowned and tried to follow the headmaster's reasoning. It means his soul is unstable, on the brink of shattering. To cross the boundary between life and death would force it to split further, perhaps without him even realizing it. A realization dawned slowly, then lit his face with horror. I don't understand what you mean. 17 years ago, on the night he attacked your parents, such an accident occurred. Rain pattered against the window as Dumbledore's words toppled the last of Harry's illusions. He murdered your parents with no remorse, and then his own killing curse rebounded on him. That event unbalanced his soul completely, splitting off a fragment he had not intended. Harry's pupils constricted. He reached for the scar on his forehead, but his arm felt leaden. He could not lift it. His lips trembled. That fragment attached itself to me. Harry, listen, Dumbledore began, but Harry, already inside his own terror, spoke over him, deaf to the headmaster's voice. No wonder we can see each other's memories. No wonder our minds are linked. No wonder the prophecy says we are destined enemies. No wonder our wands connect. No wonder my mother said we would meet again. He choked on the last words. Then, looking up at Dumbledore, tears running down his face, he asked, Is that why you've gone to so much trouble teaching me? Dumbledore's expression was complicated. Harry, listen to me. I'm a living Horcrux, too. To destroy Voldemort, I have to be killed. He cried out and could not accept it. He made for the door and strode out of the office. The heavy oak slammed so loudly the whole room echoed. Fawkes, nested in the hat, lifted his head and gave a soft, curious chirp. In the portrait gallery, Phineas Nigellus opened his eyes and smirked. I don't see how he's grown at all. So impulsive, still refusing to listen, Dumbledore. Dumbledore took a long sip of tea, his mood tangled. Why couldn't he let me finish? The first day of term after Easter. Loren woke very early, washed quickly, slipped into a new light spring jacket, and admired himself in the mirror a bit longer than necessary. Neville was already up by the time he was ready. Good morning, Loren. Good morning, Prefect Longbottom. Neville smoothed his bed and glanced at the empty bed beside Loren's. Do you remember Harry coming back last night? I went to bed earlier than you, Loren said. Oh, right. I'm off. See you later. Goodbye. He hurried downstairs, but not fast enough. Hermione was already on the sofa, not yet started on her morning reading. She raised an eyebrow when she saw him. You're up early today? Come on, let's get breakfast. Loren draped an arm over her shoulder and led her out through the portrait hole, greeting the hung and the dead on the way. He was in a good mood. Hermione tilted her head, slightly puzzled. Good news? School started. I'm happy. Can't I be happy about studying? Just being back in class makes me pleased. Do you really believe that? Hey. Loren walked behind her, hands resting on her shoulders, nudging her playfully. Defense against the dark arts this afternoon. Imagine waving the Elder Wand in front of Professor Bagshot. His face would be priceless. If you act like that in class, you'll earn detention or be set to copy the textbook, Hermione warned. Hiss. Thinking of how thick the Dada textbook would be, Loren composed himself. There were only a few students in the Great Hall, 2 or 3 around the house tables, those who could get up early on the first day back. Even if you couldn't name them all, you recognized their faces. Only McGonagall and Flitwick sat at the high table. Dumbledore was definitely still asleep. Breakfast smelled and looked lavish, bacon and fried eggs fresh from the pans, bread steaming from the ovens. Loren's interest, however, was in the fruit. Each plate bore plump, fragrant fruit, droplets of water clinging to the skins. He'd grown tired of apples that tasted like oranges and pears with strawberry flavoring. Those mismatches left him oddly disoriented. After this period of experimentation, he'd learned to optimize taste and appearance without changing a fruit's essence. Strawberry-flavored pears were hard to accept, but strawberries the size of pears, each bite the perfect tip of strawberry sweetness, were a different delight. If a strawberry looks like a strawberry and tastes like a strawberry, then it is a strawberry. This isn't an ordinary strawberry. This is a strawberry transformed by the Deathly Hallows. Hermione listened to him mutter and rolled her eyes. She thought he was ridiculous. Still, the strawberries were delicious. At a table not far away, the mood was very different. Ginny looked at the dark circles under Harry's eyes and pushed a slice of pie toward him. "Eat something, Harry. You have classes all morning." Harry stared at her pretty, concerned face, pursed his lips, and shook his head. "Thanks, Ginny, but I don't have an appetite. Are you all right? Do you feel sick?" Ginny set down the pie and tried to check his forehead for a fever. She didn't have a cloth handy, and her hands were oily from breakfast, so she mimicked her mother and pressed her forehead to his. Harry felt only that hers was warm and that her worried gaze dazzled him. How could he tell her? Nothing was physically wrong with him, only his future. After leaving Dumbledore's office, he had wandered the corridors until after lights out, then sat by the common room window until dawn before deciding he could not run from responsibility. If the safety of the wizarding world required his death, then a life for so many others was a bargain he could live with. Ginny was very good to him, and he could not bear causing her pain. If their relationship was to end, the more beautiful it was now, the worse the memory would be. He could not tell her that he would not live long. "How are you feeling? Want to ask Professor McGonagall for leave?" Ginny pressed. "No, I'm fine." "Did you forget homework? Which class? Is it due?" "No." Ginny had Weasley blood and a Gryffindor's temper. Gentle questions met with silence made her restless. Growing frustrated at Harry's withdrawn manner, she slammed the table. "Then what is the matter with you? Speak up." Those near the long table fell quiet, heads bent back to breakfast, eyes flicking sideways. Loren, watching, wore a thoughtful look. Harry opened his mouth, but no explanation came, nor did the words to end things. Ginny, a little angry and hurt, told him to think things over, and they would talk again at lunch. The great hall skylight opened as a gust of wind and rain swept through. The flap of wings followed, a delivery of owls. Hermione took a damp copy of the Daily Prophet from Hanch, unfolded it, and the rest of the students read the front page headline, gasping in succession. The Ministry of Magic has confirmed that, with the help of Dumbledore and a mysterious wizard, you-know-who suffered severe injuries and has now fled in secret. Death Eater forces have gone into hiding, related criminals remain at large. Senior Auror Alastair Moody calls for constant vigilance. A warrant has been issued for information. The Wizengamot has submitted reports to the International Confederation of Wizards warning that you-know-who and his followers may attempt to flee abroad. The ministry has regained its main building. Minister Rufus Scrimgeour announced the ministry will reopen immediately and resume normal functions. Wizards needing to conduct business are asked to make appointments in advance and to arrive on time. 710. Change of mentality. A fine rain was easing, and the summer solstice was still months away. Loren and Hermione sat by the window in the second row. Harry and Ron were a row behind them. It was the last Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson of the afternoon. The good news delivered by the owls had spread through the school in minutes. Lord Voldemort's grave wound and subsequent hibernation, and students were brimming with excitement. With that mood, lessons after the break were unexpectedly productive. Every word the professor spoke was answered. Every question met with raised hands. Even history of magic held no sleepy heads today. It was mid-April. The school year was winding down, and Defense Against the Dark Arts had reached its final unit. General-purpose charms for dealing with dark creatures. The unit title suggested techniques and spells, but Professor Grindelwald didn't focus on rote practice. He taught a way of thinking, classify creatures by traits, and match charms to those traits, guiding students toward countermeasures. If the textbook contained techniques, Grindelwald taught methodology. Take Dementors, he said. They lack a corporeal body. They affect humans with magic and drain emotions and souls with that unique proboscis. So physical methods and most conventional spells are ineffective. For a long time, the textbooks and traditional wisdom held that only the Patronus charm could repel Dementors. That raises questions. Before the Patronus was developed, how did wizards deal with Dementor-like beings? If you haven't learned the Patronus and you meet Dementors in the wild, what can you do besides give up? We match charms to traits to answer such questions. Grindelwald's voice on the podium was calm and persuasive. Students were used to his style. The textbook lay untouched on his desk while his lectures went beyond its pages. Sometimes his views even conflicted with the book. Then he would open it, compare, and explain why the textbook's view was limited. The Dementor's lack of physical form rules out physical attack charms. Dementors cause a sharp drop in temperature, so fire-based charms might at least slow the cold's effect on victims, even if they don't drive the creatures off. Dementor congregations can produce mist, so strong light-emitting charms are worth considering. He paused and looked around. We've analyzed Dementors. Who wants to analyze Inferi? Several hands shot up. Harry's attention drifted. He watched the backs of the students ahead and felt his enthusiasm dim. The excitement belonged to everyone else now. Grindelwald's gaze swept to the desk where Hermione and her deskmate sat. The boy held an unusually long wand in his hand, looking restless. Grindelwald called, "Loren Morgan." "All right, Professor," Loren answered, voice light and expression earnest, though he kept a sideways glance at Grindelwald. Inferi are corpses reanimated by dark wizards. They have no life or sensation. Spells like Stoopfire or the Knockback Jinx won't work. We should aim to incapacitate them. Because they appear in groups, area effect charms are ideal. Also, Inferi favor dark, damp places, so powerful fire charms are the best option. The class began to copy the answer into their parchments. Grindelwald let the praise sit a moment before speaking. If you were a 4th or 5th year, that answer would pass. But you're almost finished with your 6th year, and your analysis remains superficial. Your countermeasures are generic. I wonder how you'll handle the ultimate wizarding level exam next year. Loren felt the sting, but didn't argue. Pens paused across the classroom. Some students dared not meet the professor's eyes. Grindelwald continued, "You state Inferi are corpses reanimated by dark wizards, so why limit your focus to the puppets? In the wild, the first problem is the source, the dark wizard. If you can't neutralize the wizard, then you must confront the Inferi. Also, be honest about your own capabilities. Few wizards can reliably control powerful, wide-area fire charms. Most cannot." Loren's initial satisfaction cooled. Had his confidence swelled after defeating Voldemort or after taking possession of the Elder Wand? He couldn't recall. He suddenly felt grateful that his legendary former wand-bearer was his professor. Grindelwald watched him set the Elder Wand aside and resume the applewood wand he'd previously used. "Who'll analyze a banshee?" he asked. Fewer hands went up. Grindelwald called on an old, reliable student, Miss Granger. "A banshee, or wailing woman, is a dark creature from Ireland and Scotland," Hermione said. "She appears as a cloaked woman with a skull-like face, long hair, and pallid, grayish-white skin that can glow in the dark. Her wail resembles that of a mature mandrake and can cause unconsciousness or even death. If you encounter a banshee at night, the simplest protection is to block your hearing." A bit formal, but thorough. Gryffindor, 5 points. I'll add a few more notes here. Students scribbled as Grindelwald added his commentary. He checked the clock. 30 minutes remained. That's the theory. Now for group practice. Silent charms. At a word from him, students cleared desks to the sides and opened a space. The room filled with light as silent charms took shape. Students' progress with silent casting varied widely. Some produced clean, controlled effects. Others labored, producing only faint sparks. Grindelwald normally gave extra attention to the slower students, but today he walked to the group at the front. Loren and Hermione cast an unspoken rhythm, their movements uncoordinated yet harmonized, a tacit understanding between them. Beams of light met and burst like miniature fireworks. Grindelwald watched them for a while and then stood beside Loren. Once you grow accustomed to the Elder Wand's power, returning to a regular wand can feel uneven. The fact you adjusted quickly and can cast these charms consistently shows you control your magic well. Your fundamentals are solid. Loren glanced up. Has the professor had that experience? Grindelwald allowed himself a faint smile. I was as young as you once. After I got the Elder Wand, I felt like the world belonged to me. Loren and Hermione fell silent, remembering the professor's past and his once great stature. Grindelwald continued, Here are some practice methods from my experience. They'll help you master your wand rather than be mastered by it. They spoke quietly while the rest practiced. Suddenly, Ron's voice cut through the room, high and hysterical. Harry, are you all right? I didn't mean to. I wasn't aiming to hit you in the head with a knockback jinx. Ron was half crouched over an unconscious Harry, shaking him. Grindelwald moved instantly, shoved Ron back, and checked Harry. Skull fracture, but nothing irreparable. Someone take him to the hospital wing. Ron stumbled after the professor, weeping. I didn't mean to, Professor. I never thought. Grindelwald's reply was clipped. He was distracted during class. With your dueling style, you couldn't have expected that outcome. Ron's cries only grew more forlorn as they left. Loren and Hermione exchanged a quick look and followed, Loren tugging Ron along by the back of his collar. The ward went quiet as they entered. Harry lay propped up, a large, stiff bandage wrapped around his head. Madame Pomfrey bustled about, fussing over him. How is he, Madame Pomfrey? Someone asked. Don't worry, it's a skull fracture, she answered briskly. I've said it. He needs to lie still overnight so we can be sure his brain's not affected. Will he wake soon? Another voice asked. As if on cue, Harry's lids fluttered. He saw a golden chandelier and a halo of light. Dizziness blurred everything. Madame Pomfrey's hand gently opened his eyes to check the pupils. Harry, can you hear me? What number is this? The ringing in his ears faded and his sight cleared a little. He took in the faces around him. Madame Pomfrey, Ron, Loren prodding through a snack box at the bed's foot, and Hermione standing nearby. At the head of the bed to his left was Ginny, her red hair framing a worried face. Harry avoided Ginny's eyes and sat up slowly, hand going to the hard bandage. Ron scratched his head and offered only a sheepish shrug. Loren tore open a chocolate frog wrapper and murmured, There was a minor accident during practice. Do you remember? A faint memory, a flash of green light. He was about to speak when Madame Pomfrey pressed him back down and made him drink a bitter potion. Calm yourself, dear. No exertion for a while. Madame Pomfrey tidied the tray and added, Remember visiting hours. The patient needs rest and quiet. She bustled from the room. Loren and Hermione exchanged a brief look, then left without a fuss. Loren gave Ron one last yank and dragged him along. The ward grew calm again. Harry waited for Ginny to speak. He had steeled himself for questions or reproach, but she moved quietly. She straightened a pillow from the next bed and eased it behind his shoulders, then filled a glass from a kettle and offered it to him. Her eyes were bright and direct as she asked softly, Do you want something to eat? Harry's nose prickled with the sting of emotion. He nodded heavily. 711. It only takes one night to cure brain damage. It was the second day of classes after the Easter holidays. A fine drizzle persisted outside the window, not warm, not cold. Opening the window let in the fresh, damp smell of the castle grounds. It was pleasant and invigorating. The Black Lake sat a little higher than usual. The grounds, lawns, and the edges of the forbidden forest were waterlogged and swollen. Stepping down from the paths would mean mud clinging to your shoes, and it would take some effort to peel them off. After breakfast, Loren and Hermione went to Charms. Advanced Charms was moving quickly. Only a few thin pages remained in the textbook. Judging by Professor Flitwick's usual pace, he'd probably finish new material this week and move into final review. Students drifted into the classroom and filled the seats. The same familiar faces gathered in the same familiar places. The bell hadn't rung, and Flitwick hadn't arrived, so people chatted, mostly about recent news and rumors from the ministry and you-know-who. Apart from the announcement that the apparition exams were in a week, everything else was hearsay, but good fodder for conversation. My cousin works in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, a Hufflepuff said solemnly. I heard the ministry took heavy losses, especially in the clerical divisions. They're going to expand recruitment for the next 2 years. There's talk they'll be hiring in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, the Ministry of Transportation, and the Department of International Magical Cooperation, someone added. Besides the Auror office, most departments are planning recruitment drives. Will the grade requirements be lowered? Another student asked. Maybe this year, but we don't graduate until next year, came the reply. Do we even want to work for the ministry? A Slytherin interrupted. You-know-who is only temporarily quiet. He hasn't been completely defeated. If another war breaks out, those new recruits will be casualties too. The nearby students fell quiet at that. It was a harsh reality to consider. Loren watched without taking part. When Lord Voldemort had seized the ministry in that surprise attack, not every employee had been whisked away and exchanged later. Some officials had been massacred outright, creating sudden vacancies. The once stable bureaucracy was shaken, staff were scarce, and talent thin. People who joined in recent years could accelerate up the ladder quickly, achieving in a few years what took older employees decades. Objectively, risk and reward go hand in hand. 10 minutes before class, Harry and Professor Flitwick entered. The bandage on Harry's head was gone. There were no visible dents or bumps, just a slightly dazed look in his eyes and the occasional foolish grin. Loren and the others glanced over as he took his seat. Harry, how are you feeling? Ron asked hesitantly. I'm fine now. Harry shrugged, unsure whether he meant he felt bad a moment ago or that his head was fully better. Ron visibly relaxed. Madame Pomfrey's skills were impressive. Brain damage treated in one night. Are you and Ginny still arguing? Hermione asked. I didn't see her this morning. No, we had breakfast together in the hospital wing. What about last night? Parvati said Ginny didn't come back to the common room until just before lights out. Harry's expression slipped, his hand going to his face. For a moment, he looked lost and a little foolish, and then he sat back with an embarrassed laugh. Waking up for class, sitting properly in a classroom, and somehow having a public display of affection drop into his lap, Hermione and Loren shifted their gazes away. At the front, Professor Flitwick set his textbook down and chatted with the front row students. The prefects collected homework, several neat stacks of essays, and the bell rang. Flitwick climbed onto his stool and began. I hope the Easter holidays haven't made you forget what we covered last time, though I must say I hear hollow echoes coming from some heads. Laughter rippled through the classroom, the seasoned professor's way of lightening the mood and drawing attention. When it quieted, he smiled and went on. Who can remind me what we studied before the break? Silence fell. Most students avoided the professor's gaze, everyone except Hermione. Loren kept calm. He remembered the last lesson and wouldn't mind being called on. His attention, though, was on Harry. Harry's expression was still unfocused, a silly smile hanging about his mouth, evidence he was still lost in pleasant memories. But his posture was perfect, sitting up straight, eyes forward. That posture always meant trouble when it came to being noticed by teachers. Half a minute later, Harry heard his name and snapped back to the present. Everyone in the room was looking at him, Professor Flitwick in particular. Ron nudged him and pointed at the title on a clean page of his book. I'm sorry, Professor, Harry began. I didn't sleep well last night. My attention wandered. Flitwick, aware Harry had been injured and treated the day before, waved him off. Sit properly, he said kindly. We'll let you rest. Next, Flitwick continued, we'll look at the influence of ancient magic on modern mainstream magic. Let's start with the classic flame charm. Fire is not only a wizard's charm, but it was also the starting point for human civilization. Over history, fire drove away wild beasts, kept people from freezing, cooked food. We have reason to believe fire magic may have been the first form of magic humans learned, he said. Some alchemists describe the world through the four elements, earth, fire, water, and air, which gives us a framework for thinking about ancient magic. The first wizards, thousands or tens of thousands of years ago, must have taken inspiration from nature. Forest fires from lightning, floods after long rainy seasons, hurricanes sweeping settlements, earthquakes tearing the earth apart. To survive in those harsh conditions, ancient magic was often extreme, immense power, but difficult to control and dangerous to practice. As environments stabilized, those risky, complex magics faded from history. Only a few spells survived because they met ongoing needs. Take the Patronus charm, for example. Try to imagine, if Dementors vanished overnight, would anyone still learn such a complicated, demanding charm that takes so long to master? The scratch of quills on parchment filled the room. Loren rested his chin on his book and listened to Flitwick's high, resonant, passionate voice, letting his thoughts drift back to the magical world of long ago. At some point, the drizzle outside had stopped, the clouds thinned, and the rain cleared. The sky looked freshly washed, an astonishing, brilliant blue. 7:12, young couple in love. Because they were still in holiday mode, the younger students hadn't settled back into their usual routines. No one wanted to go to the dormitories, even as lights out approached. With you-know-who defeated, there was every reason to celebrate, and the common room stayed lively long into the night. The Gobstones Club had been confined to a corner to keep the sticky splatters from ruining the carpets. Exploding Snap was being played in front of the fireplace. A few of the smaller blasts escaped up the flue and made the noise less deafening. The wizard chess players and their spectators took up the open center of the room, comparatively subdued. At first glance, the Gryffindor common room seemed chaotic and noisy, but there was a clever order to the chaos. After lights out, bellflower flames in glass bottles replaced the candles. The light wasn't as bright, but its soft glow was more than enough. The soda water and sparkling wine in the drinking glasses caught the light and reflected a faint, pale blue. Harry and Ginny sat close together on the sofa, heads nearly touching, poring over a book about magical creatures. Hermione glanced over as she passed. The cover showed a dozen snarling animal portraits crowded together, teeth bared. It looked like a cheaply made picture book meant to trick children. Inside, there was almost no text. The illustrations seemed to have been grabbed from who knows where and slapped in the most prominent spot in the shop. Kids stopped dead when they saw it, and parents bought it on impulse, only to find at the register that it cost more than some thick textbooks. Hermione thought for a moment, intending to recommend a few beautifully drawn, well-researched picture books instead. But before she could speak, Loren tugged her down onto the sofa beside him. "The young couple's in the throes of first love," he murmured. "They'd find a dictionary romantic right now. Why get involved?" Hermione hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but their low voices still carried. "Ginny, what do you think about me getting a hippogriff tattooed on my chest?" one of them asked. "I think a Hungarian horntail would be better." A dragon looks more manly." "You don't need a tattoo to be manly." Hermione shivered and slid a little farther away, goosebumps rising on her arm. On her other side, Ron couldn't help but grumble, jealous and indignant. "Hey, be careful. Just because I let you two date doesn't mean you can be that blatant. This is too much." "We're blatant?" Ginny snorted. "Then what about you and Lavender? Do you remember those days? Kissing everywhere like a pair of eels stuck together. Need me to remind you? The Great Hall, the common room, the courtyard?" Ron fled, scolded into disarray. Hermione averted her gaze and wondered whether she'd ever behaved the same way in public. Compared to Ron and Lavender, she thankfully found no record of excessive public displays. Compared to Harry and Ginny, her cheeks heated. She tried to recall the first time Harry and Ginny started talking in that corner of the common room back in first year. They had chatted from classroom topics to childhood memories, from the morning star to the moon, always with endless things to say. Now she couldn't remember what they'd talked about then. It must have been foolish things, too. Loren watched Hermione, noticing the faint glimmer in her eyes, the small frowns and smiles, the way her cheeks colored. He reached up and rested the back of his hand against her cheek. "What's the matter? Why are you so red and hot? Is the common room too stuffy?" Hermione's embarrassment peaked. She glared at him fiercely. Under the pale blue firelight, her cheeks were flushed and her eyes shone. There was nothing intimidating about it. If anything, she looked helpless. Loren started to tease further, but Hermione picked up her book and stood. "Planning to sleep so early? Then I'll go wash up too. See you in the morning." Hermione hesitated, then turned back and whispered, See you in the morning. Down the corridor, dormitory doors opened and closed. In the washroom, Loren spat out a mouthful of minty foam, wiped the water from his chin, and headed out. The other roommates had already returned. The chandelier cast a warm yellow light. A huge mirror stood against one wall, its top carved with obscure inscriptions, framed in ornate gold with clawed feet. The mirror reflected the candles and lit the room. In front of it, the four roommates were lined up, staring at the glass. Ron stood in the center, eyes wide. In his reflection, he wore a magnificent Quidditch uniform, a head boy badge on his chest, and trophies and medals glittered behind him. Seamus shoved Ron impatiently, a strained expression on his face. My turn, my turn. Neville looked on with simple curiosity. He traced the mirror's carvings with his eyes and quietly read the inscription, not as excited by the image in the glass as the others. The most surprising sight was Harry. He stood beside them with a small, calm smile, gently telling the two not to shove. The mirror had been borrowed from Dumbledore, and there was no hurry to return it. They had plenty of time to look. Loren stepped over beside Harry. Why aren't you standing in front? Weren't you always saying you wanted to see your whole family together? Harry shook his head. It's not like Mum was when she stood in front of me that night. The reflection is only an illusion. It can't speak to me. It can't hear me. There isn't anything there for me to find. Loren snorted. I remember when we first found the Mirror of Erised in our first year. Someone would rather skip lunch than leave it. Harry let the remark pass, silent. As long as he didn't answer, Loren couldn't tease him further. You look better, Loren added after a moment, watching him. You seem like you've finally shaken off the listless look from the last few days. Must be the power of love. I just realized something, Harry murmured, turning his gaze back to the mirror as if speaking to someone reflected there. Because of where he stood, only a few figures showed in the glass. Professor Trelawney made that prophecy before I was born, and everything that's happened since has fit with it. If everything is destined, if the end is already written, maybe I should try to enjoy the process before it ends. Loren raised an eyebrow. Harry, I think you're putting too much weight on a prophecy. Why would you say that? You've been to the Hall of Prophecy, the Department of Mysteries. There are thousands of prophecy orbs on those shelves. You don't really think every prophecy comes true, do you? Harry stopped and looked at him. What do you mean? 713. The principal is a weird old man. Loren sat at the square table in the dormitory and poured himself a glass of water. It's precisely because Voldemort learned the prophecy, believed it, and acted on Professor Trelawney's words that your fates and souls became entangled. Harry sat down beside him, listening closely. The prophecy, to some extent, pushed events along, but that doesn't mean everything was predetermined. That this world isn't a story where a prophecy writes the ending for you. Loren took a sip from his cup. Think back over everything you've lived through. Imagine if Voldemort hadn't killed your father, would you have developed such a profound hatred? If he hadn't gone after your mother, would he have been undone by his own Avada Kedavra and fallen? That just proves the prophecy, doesn't it? It means the ending was already written. Harry frowned. Even without the prophecy's influence, those things could have happened by other means. At that time, Death Eaters were hunting members of the Order. My mother was a Muggle-born, and Wormtail had already turned to the Death Eaters. The signs pointed to that outcome. Have you ever considered that the boy born at the end of July, the one who escaped Voldemort 3 times, the supposed nemesis, the boy who lived, the child of the prophecy, might never have been you? Loren's voice was calm and slow. Neville was born just 1 day before you, and the Longbottoms also escaped Voldemort 3 times. Harry glanced over at his dependable roommate, who was currently mediating a minor argument in front of the mirror. Loren continued quietly. Have you thought that if Voldemort hadn't fixed on you after hearing the prophecy and hadn't attacked the Potters, things might have turned out differently? You could have been an ordinary student with average grades and a knack for Quidditch. Voldemort might have affected your life somehow, but your soul wouldn't have been bound to his, much like Neville's is now. Harry's eyes widened. His thoughts tumbled. Loren found the water bland and toyed with the idea of adding tea or sugar, then decided against it. Too much trouble for brushing his teeth afterward. A few minutes later, Harry pulled himself together and asked slowly, "Even if the ending wasn't fated, I still have to kill Voldemort, and I'll have to pay with my life." The last words were barely audible, but Loren heard them. He had a vague understanding now of why Harry had seemed so despondent a few days earlier. Of course, Voldemort must be completely eliminated, not just by you, but by the Ministry, the Order, perhaps even some Death Eaters. No wizard can tolerate such a cruel, powerful, dark wizard. All of us who want to live in peace must see Voldemort gone, not because of prophecy, but because of hatred and the desire for a peaceful life. But Harry touched the scar on his forehead. Seeing Loren's steady expression, he realized something and blurted out, "You know about this, don't you? I'm a Horcrux, the living Horcrux." Loren shrugged. "You didn't have to use legilimency. Your eyes and expression said enough. Forget tragic hero stories, Harry. Think carefully. Does Dumbledore strike you as the sort of man who would willingly sacrifice others to achieve his ends?" Harry thought for a few seconds, then muttered, "Sometimes. Maybe. Probably. Perhaps. I'll tell Dumbledore." Loren said it simply. Harry snapped his mouth shut, but his expression eased. The weight on him was lighter. He realized he'd been a bit rash last time, rushing out of the principal's office before Dumbledore had finished speaking. "But what about the living Horcrux?" he asked. "Do you mean your scar or the other living Horcrux?" Loren asked. "Both. I know a little about the scar and the fragment of soul, but that's complicated. You should ask Dumbledore when you have the chance. As for the other living Horcrux, Dumbledore says he'll travel the world to find it after he retires. Hermione and I don't trust that. We suspect he might be setting a trap to draw Voldemort out." "Draw him out?" Harry blinked. "But the other Horcruxes are destroyed, and Voldemort's soul is ripped to shreds. He can't make more Horcruxes. He's terrified of death and insecure. That could make him restless and paranoid. Excessive tension could expose flaws, rechecking hiding places, obsessing over precautions. Those repeated behaviors could be traces we use." Loren paused, then added, "You're right. Hearing it like that, Dumbledore does sound like a schemer." Harry fell silent, a faint light flickering in his eyes. He felt mixed emotions, part suspicion, part reluctant admiration. A small, amused sound escaped him. "Heh!" Loren yawned, drained his cup in one swallow, and shuffled toward his bed in slippers. The argument in front of the mirror had died down as the others took turns looking into it for a private glimpse of desire. When it was Ron's turn, he squinted at his reflection, tilted his head, and muttered, "I'm already captain of the Quidditch team, and we only have one match left this year, Ravenclaw. Unless something goes wrong, the cup's ours." "That's a bit of a wish," Siemis observed, feeling for some reason that the Mirror of Erised had lost some of its appeal. Loren settled onto his bed to sleep. Harry remained in his chair, turning over thoughts. Neville changed into pajamas and began washing up. Quiet settled over the dormitory as everyone prepared for bed. Ron and Siemis didn't linger by the mirror. They found some cloth and draped it over the frame, covering the large glass. When the candles were put out, all five of them lay in their beds, and the night lay like a lake outside the window. Harry took off his glasses, set them on the bedside table, made a hollow in his pillow, rested his head, and let the swirls of thought spin. Recalling the conversation from that evening, he turned and hissed twice at his roommate in the next bed. "Loren, don't you think you're a bit like Dumbledore?" "Me? Dumbledore?" Loren replied, turning over. Although the principal was clever and powerful, that didn't change the fact that he was an eccentric old man. Remembering the principal's odd behavior and peculiar words, Loren tried to shake the images from his head. Thinking about such things before bed, would it give him nightmares? In April, the grass in the courtyard was already lush. The rain had finally stopped, and the sky, washed clean, was a bright, clear blue. It was neither warm nor cold. Just the right amount of sunshine fell across everything, lending the world a soft, halcyon filter. Leaves a vivid green, the lake glass clear, and the girls walking in the sun with skin that seemed to glow. 2 weeks after the holidays ended, Hogwarts had resumed normal teaching. Some subjects were already pushing to finish the year early. Since last weekend, Hermione had been leading a few boys through intensive revision schedules for Transfiguration, Charms, and Potions. She'd also roped Loren into organizing notes for their electives, arithmancy and ancient runes. Other courses were temporarily set aside. It was Sunday at noon. As usual, Loren and the others, who had spent the morning in the library, were heading to the Great Hall for lunch when a commotion around the stairwell drew their attention. A cluster of 6th and 7th years crowded the notice board. Seamus and Dean were at the center, loudly reading an announcement. Loren and the others arrived late and missed parts of it, but by listening to the surrounding chatter, they pieced it together. The notice stated that 6th and 7th years would have their morning classes suspended tomorrow. From 9 to 11, Ministry of Magic officials would be conducting apparition tests on the Quidditch pitch. Students who passed would receive their certification within 5 working days. There was no fixed order and no need to arrive early. As long as the test was completed within the allotted time, students could apply at any point during that window. Any missed class time would be made up at each professor's discretion. They even have makeup classes, Loren muttered, frowning. Hogwarts had picked up the habit of makeup classes. The apparition test was important. If it delayed lessons, it delayed them. What logic was there in tacking on makeup sessions afterward? He sighed as they entered the Great Hall. The smell of freshly prepared food lifted his mood instantly. Lightly seared steaks, steaming mushroom cream soup, heaps of roasted chicken drumsticks. He sat at the end of the long table, wiped his hands with a napkin, and said, "Well, we may as well eat first." The next morning, 9:30, Hogwarts Castle Hall. Hermione stood at the bottom of the stone staircase in her black school robe, shoulders neat and straight, her posture giving her an air of calm authority. Her loose black trousers hung in a way that made her calves look long and straight. She stared at her shoes, expression placid, as if studying a scuffed lace, a stray wildflower, or an ant. A bright spring sky spread overhead, and the castle cast broad shadows across the grounds. A gentle breeze stirred the treetops, carrying the fresh scent of grass and earth. Loren walked down beside her, reached over and gave her right shoulder a quick pat. Hermione glanced up, then immediately looked away, her expression unreadable. Loren grinned and took her hand, lacing their fingers together and swinging them back and forth. "Come on, let's go. We're taking the test." "Childish," Hermione said flatly. "You see? Don't underestimate a simple prank," Loren teased, correcting her in mock seriousness. "The anatomy's complex. There's real biology involved." Hermione snorted. "Neuroscience tells you the left and right hemispheres have different roles, logic and reason versus emotion and intuition. Factor in sex differences and individual variation, and the left-hand pat versus right-hand pat has to be chosen with care depending on the person. And if you get it wrong, you risk failure. Someone might look the other way or be touched on the wrong shoulder and look in the opposite direction." Hermione paused. "Now you understand? Pranks aren't simple." "You completely misunderstood me," Loren said, though he couldn't help smiling. Nearby, students who had already taken their tests passed by. Hermione's voice went quiet. "I wasn't calling the prank childish. I was calling you childish. Darn it." Loren stopped swinging their joined hands and slipped both theirs into his pocket to warm them. She'd only complain about sweaty palms later. At the Quidditch pitch, Dumbledore had temporarily lifted the wards, allowing limited apparition within the enclosed area. The center of the pitch had been ringed off with last year's Christmas streamers, creating a flat testing field. Neither of them had ever spent much time on the pitch itself. Quidditch took place in the air, and the stands were high above, so standing on the turf felt oddly novel. The registration process was straightforward. Sign in, take a number, and wait to be called. Loren dragged Hermione to the back of the queue and craned his neck. The busiest period had passed. Fewer than 10 students were currently in the testing area. At the front sat a Ministry of Magic employee, a woman from the Department of Transportation, behind a table with a registration sign. Her voice was soft and a touch hoarse, but she was patient and thorough, even with choices she had repeated all morning. Hermione rolled her eyes at the antiquated tag system and mused that if she were ever minister, she'd replace it with self-filled application forms listing name, age, house, and bin the number tag nonsense. She already had the air of someone who could be minister someday. The testing itself was just like practice. Candidates stood in the designated area, a set distance from old wooden hoops, and waited for the examiner's command to apparat. On arrival, the examiners checked the body and the departure spot. No splinching meant a pass. Each candidate had only one attempt. Pass, and you got your certificate in 5 working days. Fail, and you had to wait 3 months to try again. All right, next group. Loren and Hermione stepped into the line. A Ravenclaw group stood 10 feet apart facing the hoops. The examiner, after an hour on his feet, sounded hoarse, but his movements were precise. With a series of crackling pops, the students vanished from the pitch and reappeared in the wooden hoops. Pass, the examiner called. He first inspected Loren, limbs intact, features whole, eyebrows present, jotted his number in the register, looked down at his feet precisely on the landing spot, and raised an impressed eyebrow. Lady Luck's smiling on you. Perfectly accurate landing. Thank you, Loren said. Both he and Hermione had passed. As they turned away, a thin voice called from behind. Wait a moment. A man with white hair came hurrying up, Wigbert Tewksbury, his skin almost translucent in the bright light, veins faintly visible beneath it. Greetings, Mr. Morgan. Miss Granger, he said, slightly out of breath. Hello, Mr. Tewksbury, they replied. Tewksbury, still panting, had news. Because you know who has been dormant, we've been able to reclaim some office space. My colleagues and I are encouraged. The pace of textbook compilation has quickened, and it looks like we might publish ahead of schedule. How much earlier? Hermione asked. 2, maybe 3 years, possibly. Loren gave a perfunctory look of excitement that didn't quite hide his sarcasm. He wasn't particularly invested in when a ministry textbook appeared. He'd be long graduated by then. Tewksbury laughed at the tone and went on. On Percy Weasley's suggestion, Madame Bones is pushing to reconstruct the flu network. The Department of Transportation needs to expand, and I'd like to invite you to join the ministry, specifically the Department of Transportation. Hermione's eyes brightened. Flu network reconstruction? Madame Bones thinks the current network is too rudimentary, Tewksbury explained. It's convenient, but its confidentiality is poor. Anyone inside the department can monitor flu paths across Britain. That's reckless and a dereliction of duty. The reconstruction would encrypt routes so that surveillance would require signed approval from the Wizengamot or the minister's office. I think you'd be an excellent fit, he said. You graduate next year. I wanted to invite you to work on the project. Loren clicked his tongue. Thank you. I'll consider it. A job at the ministry would certainly polish a resume. They walked back toward the castle, shoulders almost touching. Will you really consider it? Hermione asked softly. Of course. You always sounded like you didn't want a job after graduation, she said, surprised. With Grandfather Bates's assets, alchemy, and the Philosopher's Stone, I thought you'd stay home and only come out when boredom forced you. I wouldn't get bored no matter how long I stayed home, Loren replied, brushing his shoulder against hers. The internet's expanding, and the film, TV, and gaming industries are about to go through big changes. So what changed your mind? You already told me. You want us to be colleagues, go to work and come home together. Hermione only smiled faintly. The two slowed their pace, walking hand in hand along the path like young lovers in the first flush of affection. The grass was a tender green, wildflowers scented the air, and between them there were no forks they couldn't navigate. Yet somehow they turned toward the lake and strolled along its edge, stopping to admire the ripples and the sculpted branches of the trees. They only remembered lunch when a bass leapt out of the water and scattered the surface with silver. Back at the castle, other students who'd been lost on the grounds returned as well. Many seventh years who ought to have been in the library cramming for NEUTs, but had been lured out by the apparition test and late spring weather. As Loren and Hermione entered the hall, the smell of food drifted up, warming their stomachs. Draco Malfoy passed them, having lingered outside too. He murmured to Nott, "Stop asking. I don't know where they are." Loren watched them go toward the Slytherin table. Hermione's voice was soft. The Daily Prophet ran a follow-up last week. Someone reported seeing Death Eaters in Albania, but Professor Lupin's letter to Harry said sightings were in Northern Ireland. Aurors are checking Death Eater families, but there's nothing concrete yet. Whether from the Ministry's view or Voldemort's, Loren said with some feeling, the Malfoy's wealth is too conspicuous. Given everything, Draco's being off the radar might actually be good for him. As heir to that family, he needs to withstand people trying to pick at their fortune. Hardship makes him grow. That sounded exactly like something Dumbledore would say, Hermione teased. Ooh. 715. A good commentator was replaced again Saturday, May 3rd, the Quidditch final of the school year. Gryffindor's opponent was Ravenclaw. The build-up to the match wasn't peaceful. Students traded angry words and threats in the corridors and the Great Hall, and the old taunt, "Weasley is our king," resurfaced around the castle in altered versions. Ron reacted to the different versions in two extremes. Sometimes he basked in the attention with a smug look. Other times he turned pale and his hands trembled. Still, given the gap in strength between the houses, most agreed Gryffindor would keep the cup. With Draco Malfoy gone from the Slytherin team, their new seeker was mediocre. Hufflepuff's new lineup was still finding its rhythm, and Gryffindor had steamrolled through recent matches. The pitch scores converted into house points left little suspense for the House Cup. Ravenclaw's only hope was an improbable 300-point swing by winning the Quidditch championship, a revelation so unlikely that even the underground bookies weren't setting odds. Ravenclaw had long been the weakest team. They couldn't match Slytherin's ruthless tactics, Hufflepuff's steady coordination, or Gryffindor's reckless tenacity. Worse, they were in the middle of a chaotic turnover. New players had joined at the start of the year and hadn't fully gelled before veterans graduated. Chambers had replaced Samuels, Bradley replaced Ingleby, Captain Roger Davies was gone, and even Cho Chang was nearing graduation. The team's continuity was a mess. The two teams swept onto the pitch and greeted each other. When Harry shook Cho Chang's hand, he saw her delicate, determined face and felt oddly stunned for a heartbeat. "Don't underestimate us," she said. Cho laughed softly, released his hand, and settled her grip on her broom. Her black hair was tied in a high ponytail. She wore Ravenclaw blue and bronze and looked every bit the heroic, composed captain. "Good luck," Harry grunted back. Ginny, their chaser, hovered at his shoulder, smiling but with a not-so-pleasant glint in her eyes. At Madame Hooch's whistle, the teams rose, the quaffle and bludgers flashed through the air, and brooms carried players into battle. Harry and Cho didn't immediately lock onto each other. Each drifted around the field, searching for the hidden golden snitch. Ravenclaw played like a different side. Everyone held their breath as the visitors hit levels beyond their usual form. A backward pass turned into a scoring play. They shifted into a hawkhead formation and pressed forward. One beater's bat swung in a wide arc and sent a bludger thudding away with a dull knock. The quaffle zipped between players, possession flipping constantly. The crowd's roar rose and fell like a tide. Bang! The quaffle threaded a hoop from a tight angle, the Ravenclaw eagle banner snapping overhead. Loren, in the back row, watched and thought how cool it looked. One round of attack and defense ended. Ravenclaw wheeled back, whistles of exertion trailing. Gryffindor regrouped, bumped fists near the hoop, teased their keeper and captain, and then swung into a counterattack. Congratulations to Ravenclaw for another goal. The score is now 110 to 110. Ravenclaw has tied the match. Loren bent toward Hermione. This new Hufflepuff commentator is so boring. His voice has no punch, and his commentary's got nothing interesting. Luna was brilliant last match. Why did they sack her? What a shame. Hermione ignored him. She didn't need to answer. The whole business of the dismissed commentator was a sore subject. Sunlight slanted through the stained glass windows of the girls' lavatory, dappled and bright across the tiled walls. The cheers from the pitch reached the castle as a distant, muffled thunder. Draco Malfoy's ears twitched. He stood at the sink, hands planted on the porcelain, head bowed. His white shirt made him look tall and thin, almost fragile. Myrtle's translucent, blue-tinged face drifted up out of the wall behind him, her eyes magnified by thick, round glasses. "What's the matter?" she asked gently. Water dripped into the basin with an otherworldly plink. "Don't be like this." Myrtle stumbled. She was usually the one who sobbed in public, not someone people cried in front of. She sounded flustered and oddly unsure of how to respond. "Tell me what's wrong. Maybe I can help. If I can't, I'll go find my friends." "Enough." Draco took a steadying breath. What I'm doing has to stay secret. It must never be revealed. All right, Myrtle's voice softened. She understood secrecy. When she'd been alive, she'd been bullied and alone, consigned to speaking only to herself in a bathroom mirror. Draco reached for the tap, cupped cool water in his hand, splashed his face, and felt the chill steady him. He looked up at the mirror. Steam had fogged the glass into a haze, blurring his reflection into a smear. Myrtle, he began, voice low, watching the mist condense into tiny rivulets on the glass. Are you familiar with the castle? Of course, Myrtle said. Myrtle's been at Hogwarts for decades. I know every tower and dungeon, every stair and service passage, even the kitchens and common rooms. And the headmaster's office? Professor McGonagall keeps ghosts away from the staff rooms, but Headmaster Dumbledore doesn't mind. I go to speak with him sometimes. Do you remember Halloween's performance? The choral parts were arranged by Mr. Dumbledore. He's very talented. Draco's breath fogged the mirror further, then the steam thinned and the glass cleared in patches, splitting his face into little islands. He watched the droplets fall and found his voice at the smallest of volumes. I have a request. Anything I can do? Myrtle pressed. Draco stared into the fractured reflection. The face coming into focus looked tired but resolute. Never mind. I was going to ask whether Headmaster Dumbledore is in his office, but I'll go to him directly. Oh, are you lost? He's at the Quidditch pitch watching the final. Yes, sorry. I must be confused. It's all right, we're friends, Myrtle said softly. Draco walked out of the lavatory toward the gargoyle statue, his steps slow. Passing an open-windowed corridor, a long cheer rolled over the castle. It sounded like a Gryffindor victory. 716. Conjugated Horcrux. 2 hours after the starting whistle, the match had settled into a stalemate. Both teams were exhausted. Their attacks came less frequently, but no less fiercely, and the occasional score whistle still sent ripples through the stands. Gryffindor leads by a narrow margin, but Ravenclaw is closing in. The score is now 190 to 200. Everything hinges on the two seekers. The commentator's voice was already hoarse, but no one paid attention. Every eye was on Harry and Cho Chang. Harry Potter is slowing. No, what a sudden turn. The golden snitch. Harry's got it with a brilliant Prenton reversal. The 2-hour match is over. The stadium exploded with cheers. Gryffindor had won by 160 points. Under Madame Hooch's watchful eye, both teams landed and exchanged greetings. Cho's eyes were rimmed with red, but she smiled through it and gave Harry a polite hug before they parted. Happy graduation, Harry murmured. There's still a month until the end-of-year feast, Cho answered. Then happy graduation in advance, Harry said. I hope you keep winning, she added. Thank you. Goodbye, Harry. Goodbye. Ginny stood beside him, eyes narrow with protectiveness, practically breathing fire. The wistfulness that had flitted across Harry's face vanished. Seeing how fiercely she cared for him warmed him from the inside. He slipped his arm around her. Don't be jealous. It was just a seeker's goodbye. Cho has Cedric anyway. Ginny squinted up at him. You mean, if it weren't for Cedric, you'd have tried? Oof! Ignoring the school's prying eyes, Harry's public display of affection with Ginny earned him the dubious reward of being left behind to stow the equipment. The team captain assigned him and a few others to put the brooms away, clean them, and return them to the equipment room while the rest headed back to the common room for the celebration. Ginny, really, she didn't even stick up for me. Harry muttered under his breath as he pulled a canvas cloth from the cabinet, dabbed it in tongue oil, and began wiping down broom handles. The season was over. Unless something unexpected happened, these special match brooms wouldn't see daylight for months. Best to maintain them now or risk finding them full of holes next term. He oiled, polished, counted, sealed them in the cabinet, then checked the list twice. When he was satisfied no broom had been forgotten, Harry locked the equipment room, cast an extra Alohomora countercharm, and started back toward the castle. If Lord Voldemort or any dark wizard tries to sneak in again, they won't get their hands on these brooms, he said to himself with a small grin. Dumbledore walked up beside him, his gray robes billowing and his beard ruffling in the breeze. A fine match, the headmaster said. That last Prenton reversal was masterful. Have you ever considered taking your talent professional? Bigger pitches? Larger crowds? Harry paused. He'd learned patience over the years. A few winters ago he might have snapped, but now he smiled politely. "Thank you, Professor, but I'd rather be an Auror." "With the Ministry's expansion, your prospects are excellent," Dumbledore said. Then, casually, Professor Quirrell mentioned he'd been practicing a calming charm with you on the pitch. "Did you notice?" Harry brightened at the reminder. Ever since his conversation with Loren about living Horcruxes, he'd wanted to speak with Dumbledore about them, but the end of term, the apparition exams, and the Quidditch final had kept getting in the way. The match was brilliant, especially that reversal. It deserves to be in the top plays of the year. They walked in companionable silence for a moment. Harry took a breath and steered the conversation where he'd meant to all term. "There's something else I need to talk to you about. Voldemort. After I left your office that night, I thought about it a lot. Loren told me." Dumbledore listened, his blue eyes patient and bright. When Harry finished recounting what he'd learned, the headmaster's face softened, the lines around his eyes easing. "Severus wrote last week about the snakewood at Ilvermorny," Dumbledore said. "There are no obvious abnormalities, although its branches are not as dense as they once were. Agilbert has invited me to inspect it over the summer. I'll look into it personally." "And if the snakewood isn't the Horcrux?" Harry asked. "Then we must rely on wisdom and, on occasion, the favor of Lady Luck." Dumbledore winked. "I know a friend who keeps company with Lady Luck herself." Harry frowned, suspicious but reluctant to press. He set that line of inquiry aside for the moment and asked the question that had kept him uneasy for weeks. "Sir, Loren said it would be complicated to explain. How can I safely destroy the piece of soul that's tied to my scar?" Dumbledore's expression shifted. Something more serious settled over him. "Do you remember the protection your mother left you?" "Yes," Harry replied softly. "That old magic, her sacrifice, bounced back the killing curse, destroyed Voldemort's body, and made me the boy who lived. That was a power born of love, Harry, a power that transcends most charms. I extended that protection through the bond of blood. That is why you had to return to the Dursleys each year. It maintained the link. But there is more to explain." Dumbledore's face grew grave and very honest. "When Voldemort returned to a body, he took your blood as part of his ritual. He believed this would strengthen him. He did not understand love. It has never been part of him." Harry's throat tightened. "I don't follow." "The magic your mother left was meant to fade when you came of age," Dumbledore said slowly. "But because Voldemort incorporated a trace of that magic into himself, something unexpected happened. The protection that was meant to abide with you now has a part within his body. That paradox, magic meant to oppose him residing within him, caused a transformation no one could have foreseen. His body, in a sense, holds and sustains that spell. As long as that spell endures, you cannot be killed." Harry's face went slack with shock. His eyes widened, disbelief and horror fighting for expression. "You mean, it's like he's made me into a Horcrux?" Dumbledore did not smile. "There are many ways for a soul to be fragmented and anchored. What you describe is not impossible. The exact nature of what happened will require careful study. But understand this, whatever ties your life to Voldemort's, if such a tie exists, we must learn how to sever it safely. Destroying a piece of soul is no trifling matter." Harry swallowed. The idea that part of his life might be bound to the darkest man alive chilled him more than any cold wind. He wanted answers, methods, certainty, and Dumbledore's steady presence made that need bearable, if only a little. "Loren suggested I ask you," Harry said finally. "You asked well," Dumbledore replied, "and you shall have time to learn. For now, rest. Your body has been pushed hard enough this season. Come, the feast will be in a month. We have summer ahead and work to prepare." Harry nodded. He tucked the image of Cho's polite hug and Ginny's fierce scowl into the background of his thoughts, and held tighter to the fact that he was not, in truth, alone in facing whatever came next. Horcrux? No, Harry. This power is the exact opposite of a Horcrux. A Horcrux is made by splitting your soul through unrepentant murder. What your mother did was the opposite. She sacrificed herself. Pure, selfless love, at that moment, produced an ancient magic unlike any other. It imprinted a protective charm into your blood. Ordinarily, such an imprint would fade, as most spells and enchantments do. Voldemort knew nothing of it. He pursued only shallow power. By accident, he bound your blood to his body, and that allowed the protection to persist. Dumbledore's voice carried reverence. He did not merely honor a mother's sacrifice. As a great wizard, he admired a power that transcended ordinary magic. The protection born of love 16 years ago had consequences so profound it destroyed Voldemort's body at the height of his power, leaving nothing but a shadow afraid to show itself. The Death Eaters, deprived of their leader, fell apart overnight. Decades of unrest in the British magical community came to an abrupt halt. Harry felt warmth behind his eyes. He had heard the story 100 times, but his mother's love always tightened his throat. He did not want to show vulnerability before the headmaster, so he changed the subject. If Voldemort can't kill me, and we can't kill Voldemort, what do we do next? I'm glad you meet death with such calm, Harry, but at your age it's far too early to dwell on that, Dumbledore said, patting his shoulder. You need not go on a deathly quest yourself. You only need to destroy the piece of soul in your scar. How? Harry asked. Dumbledore hesitated. I have a plan, but, Harry, I cannot be certain. Harry was unruffled. He quoted casually, Godric Gryffindor once said you shouldn't set out with dozens of contingencies. If there is one thing you must take, it's your wand and Gryffindor's sword. The headmaster's mouth twitched into a smile. That was Gryffindor's way of mocking the other founders. You know that, do you not? I do, Harry said, and I think Gryffindor had a point. You were in Gryffindor at school too, headmaster. Don't worry about hypotheticals. Tell me the plan. It is hardly more than a hypothesis, Dumbledore admitted. The protective magic is bound into both your blood and Voldemort's. Because of that, his killing curse cannot end your life, but it can, if directed at you, destroy the fragment of soul lodged in your forehead. So as long as Voldemort tries to kill me, your plan works? Harry's tone held a note of suspicion he would have expected from any other person. After a moment, he added, If I can't die because of him, why not let someone else remove the soul piece? Why make him do it? Only a few things can destroy a fragment of soul, Dumbledore explained. Fiendfire, the killing curse, basilisk venom, and the sword of Gryffindor. Whichever of those does the deed is what matters. Who wields it less so? Voldemort might, perversely, be the most determined to finish it. It sounded odd, but it made a strange kind of sense. Harry fell silent, thinking. Later that night in the Gryffindor common room, the castle hummed with its usual life. Although Loren had not taken the advanced astronomy course that year, he still went up to the tower to study most nights, until nearly lights out. He returned to the dormitory humming, greeting his indulgent, mirror-obsessed roommates as he went. The discipline of study pleased him. Astronomy might well be a lifelong hobby. London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. Lock up your keys. Lock them up, he sang under his breath. Harry, sitting at a table, finally heard the tune properly and listened to a couple more lines. He frowned. Loren, why do the lyrics of that song sound so strange? They do, don't they? Loren said, pouring himself a glass of orange juice. He hadn't brushed his teeth yet, so he preferred something sweet. Hermione says it's an allegory about Anne Boleyn. Henry VIII accused her of adultery and incest, and she was executed for treason. But I reckon it's a dark arts ritual. In some cultures, they sealed children into a building's foundations during construction to make it hold. Harry's eyebrows shot up. The thought was ridiculous and a little grim. It halted the train of thought he had been following about Horcruxes. Loren shook the teapot. Half a pot of juice remained, and if he didn't drink it now, the house elf would pour it away. He sat down beside Harry. Not joining the party? Not making faces in the mirror with Seamus? What are you doing sitting here all alone? Thinking about the living Horcrux. Dumbledore has a plan. Loren sipped his orange juice and listened. As Harry described Dumbledore's idea, Loren's casual guesses coalesced into a clearer picture. He was not surprised. Rather, he was pleased. Dumbledore talking these matters through with Harry in person, rather than relying on relics and posthumous instructions, was a sign Harry's previous work had bought them time. The unexpected presence of a living Horcrux complicated things, however. Loren set down his cup and regarded Harry with a contemplative look. What do you think of the plan? Isn't it too risky? What if something goes wrong and you end up, well, dead, which, would be a relief for you, really. Harry let out an exasperated sigh and poured himself a glass of orange juice in retort. Of course I trust Dumbledore, and I'm willing to go along with the plan. I'm just worried about where the other living Horcrux might be and whether Voldemort might return in another 10 years. The other living Horcrux, Loren considered. From what we know about Voldemort's choices, after the diary, he used items of special significance to him, things with historical or personal value. Harry nodded. He's obsessive and ritualistic. The last Horcrux has to be something extraordinary. If it's living, he wouldn't pick a random animal. Loren's face took on a speculative expression. Someone? Those two words, suggesting a person, made Harry's heart skip. 718. This encouragement sounds really encouraging. Harry took a sip of orange juice, trying to settle the unease in his chest, but a chill ran from the tip of his tongue down into his stomach. The sweet taste brought him no comfort. He opened his mouth and, with little confidence, asked quietly, "Before you start guessing who Voldemort might have turned into a Horcrux, is there any chance it could be that snake tree at Ilvermorny? That snake tree is certainly unusual," Loren mused. According to Ilvermorny, a history, the tree actually grew where a wand once lay, a wand said to have been made by Slytherin himself. It was taken by a collateral relative of the Gaunts, who later became Ilvermorny's founder, Isolde Sayre. Gormlaith Gaunt came to claim it, and during their struggle, she used Parseltongue to render the snakewood wand dormant. After they defeated Gormlaith, Isolde, not knowing Parseltongue, couldn't wake the wand, so she buried it on the back hill. Not long after, a snake tree sprouted where the wand had been buried. Harry glanced at Loren and thought about how people change one another over time. He nodded. It's historically significant, right? Voldemort worshipped Slytherin. If he already made a Horcrux of the Gaunt Ring and Slytherin's locket, it makes sense he'd want to keep something as special as that snake tree, and it fits the idea of a living Horcrux. But the snake tree is far too conspicuous. Loren shook his head. Voldemort's soul is already stretched thin. A living Horcrux would be his last anchor. Afraid of death, he wouldn't entrust his final safeguard to something so obvious, especially something that Ilvermorny's head and the American Magical Congress have examined more than once. Loren paused, riffling through memories, then added thoughtfully, given that his previously hidden Horcruxes and entrusted objects have been destroyed, and considering Voldemort's arrogance and terror of death, he wouldn't feel safe putting his last hope in someone else's hands or in some remote place. I suspect he'd find a way to keep a living Horcrux under his direct protection. That makes sense. Harry's mind flicked to small magical creatures Hagrid had mentioned. He remembered the pygmy puffs Ginny once had, adorable until they hunted spiders and tore them apart, at which point Ginny could no longer bear them and gave them to Hagrid. A living thing carrying a soul fragment would have to obey Voldemort's command, not flee and have enough self-preservation. Maybe it's one of the Death Eaters. Loren's tone shifted. Or it could be an unsuspecting witch or wizard, a random customer in a cloak at a boutique, a spectator at a Quidditch match. Voldemort liked ritual, so maybe Ilvermorny's head or MAC officials are likelier. If they returned without knowing, living and working normally, they might even unconsciously give us clues. Harry felt the cold orange juice drain the last of his warmth. A fine sweat prickled along his back. If Voldemort did that, how do we find the Horcrux? Loren took a sip, shrugged. I don't know. Dumbledore might know. Right now, the only thing I can think of is getting Professor Trelawney thoroughly drunk and making her give a prophecy. For a moment, Loren's flippancy faded, and Harry, grateful for the levity, fired back another idea. What about Veritaserum or Legilimency? We don't have many leads. Maybe we could extract the truth from Voldemort's own mind. Veritaserum, Legilimency, and the most powerful dark wizard in history. Loren's smirk nearly returned, but then he stopped and looked at Harry more seriously. If it were you, though, there might actually be a chance. You mean? Harry leaned forward as understanding dawned. You mean because our souls are connected, there's a channel between us. We've used it to glimpse each other's memories. Maybe I could use that to see Voldemort's memories of creating and hiding a Horcrux. That's not exactly what I meant, Loren sighed. Strictly speaking, you've only ever glimpsed scattered images during his emotional outbursts. And Voldemort is a master of legilimency. He even controlled you from hundreds of miles away. I'm skeptical about that plan. I've learned occlumency now, Harry protested. I can block him and break his control. Dumbledore even said he can't invade my mind because it's full of love. Voldemort's allergic to that kind of gooey emotion. Loren paused. He does block you with occlumency. Voldemort mastered it in his 3rd year. Harry's shoulders drooped. He didn't want to admit it, but the facts were clear. He wasn't particularly gifted at occlumency or legilimency. Loren softened his tone. Still, try it. Your fate and Voldemort's are entwined. For years you foiled him when magic alone failed. You're his nemesis from a dimension magic hasn't touched. Destiny moves in strange ways. You might be able to break through defenses and find the living Horcrux. Loren drained the last of his juice, set down his cup, and stood to wash up and go to bed. Harry stuck his tongue out at his retreating back. Before Loren left, he turned and said with a casual look, "Oh, by the way, if you want to know more about legilimency, ask me anytime." "I will, Professor Morgan," Harry answered. Headmaster's office. After replying to Fontana and Severus, Dumbledore thumbed through the remaining letters, made a note to reply to the International Confederation of Wizards on tomorrow's schedule, and spent 5 minutes gathering Fawkes's loose feathers. He then used the next couple of hours trimming his slightly split beard and doing a little grooming. Night deepened outside the windows. The busy headmaster was finally ready to rest. He brewed a cup of hot cocoa, settled into his chair, and sipped slowly, just beginning to feel drowsy when a knock sounded on the door. "Come in." The door opened. "Draco, what brings you here so late?" At 6:30, the sun was sinking in the west. The Great Hall was quieter than usual. Starting today, Hogwarts had officially suspended ordinary classes. The lower years would begin their final exams tomorrow, while the middle and upper years schedules would come a little later, and the ultimate wizarding level exams for the graduates were saved for last. 7th years looked as if they had been through a ringer. Dark circles, bloodshot eyes, strained expressions. The clink of silverware and porcelain mixed with the low murmur of students cramming, while other conversations were kept deliberately soft. The whole hall felt heavy with the pressure of exams. The kitchen sent up more food than usual. Where meat platters had once been rationed, they were now plentiful, and dishes from various cuisines kept appearing. Anyone who missed a meal could slip into the kitchens at night, if they could avoid the caretakers, and be welcomed by warm food and obliging house elves. Loren had imagined sampling a bit of everything, but faced with the spread, he decided to make it a week-long project. Hermione, as always, took only a few favorites, modest portions, and looked every inch the model student as she ate and flipped through her notes. "Move over," Loren said. Hermione thought he was reaching for the mayonnaise, so she shifted back slightly to make room. Instead, his hand closed her notebook. She couldn't help a small, baffled smile. "Stop staring. You could recite those notes from memory. Eat properly and let your brain relax." He put a meat platter on her plate. "For me, reviewing notes is relaxation. It helps my pre-exam nerves." "Is that so? I thought it was a psychological tactic. Study hard to make others anxious and lose sleep, then watch them flop in their exams." "I'm not like that." "The first-year Transfiguration theory exam," Hermione said dryly. "Somebody deliberately rustled their paper to make the others nervous." Loren went red. "Don't be ridiculous," he snapped. "I'll sue you for slander. I'll sue you. Do you know that? I'll sue you for slander. Wow." Hermione bit off a piece of meat near the bone and put it in her mouth, too uninterested to argue. After dinner, they didn't go straight back to their common room, nor to the astronomy tower for last-minute revision. Instead, they walked out of the Great Hall together and strolled across the courtyard. The last rays of sun hadn't entirely faded. A pale moon was already showing. Birds were settling into the trees, and the castle was growing quieter. The next morning, the 6th years sat their first final, the practical defense against the dark arts exam. The material that year had been difficult, but Professor Bagshot's marking was flexible. She valued the thought process students used to keep themselves alive when confronted with danger. Sensible, well-reasoned answers earned credit. For example, one short-answer sub-question went, "When camping in the Scottish Highlands, you encounter a pregnant Welsh green dragon head-on. What measures should you take to ensure maximum safety, and why? The orthodox response analyzed the dragon's physiology, attack methods, the temperament of a pregnant dragon, and then proposed measures and spells based on that information. A tiny number of students, however, wrote things like, "Strike first, knock the dragon out with a powerful Expelliarmus." Bagshot didn't automatically fail those papers. She turned them over to check the name. If the candidate was Harry Potter, she might award a few points anyway. After defense came theory papers in Transfiguration, Charms, History of Magic. The major theory exams took 3 days. Practical exams for each subject followed and were much quicker, usually less than 2 hours, even counting the lining up. The final theory exam was Charms. Professor Flitwick's task for them was to combine a weather charm with a freezing charm to create a desktop scene with overall overcast skies and localized snow and ice. The trick was in the subtle transitions. Taking the spell slowly and confidently was often the best tactic. Loren's demonstration earned him Flitwick's praise, and the teacher's smile as he left hinted at a perfect mark. By the time Loren's 6th year ended, Hermione's hadn't. She still had ancient runes the next afternoon. Loren camped out in the library with her, reviewing runes and helping to proofread translations. He thought he was being helpful, after he pointed out, for the 3rd time, that her phrasing could be more elegant. She politely ejected him. She didn't much appreciate his good intentions. That afternoon, Loren lingered on the memory of his own elegant phrasing as he headed back to the dormitory. He pushed open the door to find all 4 of his roommates there. Neville was packing. He had half his body inside his trunk, and it looked a bit alarming. Loren glanced at his own wardrobe and suitcase, thought for a moment, and decided not to rush. There were still 2 weeks until the holidays. Seamus stood in front of the mirror, giggling at something he refused to explain, only giggling harder when asked. Ron's open suitcase sat on his bed, and Ron himself was admiring a photograph, a group shot taken after the recent Quidditch victory by the little-known Colin Creevey, for which Colin had been paid with Harry's autograph. Harry sat in a chair, eyes narrowed and brow tightly furrowed. He was not asleep. "Harry, what are you doing?" Loren sat beside him, picked up the teapot, poured himself a cup of lemon and honey tea, and took a sip. The citrus and honey mingled nicely. He'd used very little sugar. Harry opened his eyes. "I'm practicing legilimency." Loren frowned. "Who are you practicing on?" "Myself." Loren blinked. This roommate really had issues. Harry seemed to read the look and explained earnestly, "I've seen Lord Voldemort's perspective before, and he's used legilimency on me. I think there's some secret passage between our minds. If I can find the entrance to that passage, my legilimency might be able to follow it into Voldemort's mind." Loren dropped a few sugar cubes into his cup and swirled them with the cup itself, rather than fetch a spoon. "What you're saying makes sense, but you should learn proper legilimency first." "I'm practicing." "Harry, legilimency is about reading other people's thoughts and memories," Loren said. "Sitting with your eyes closed and trying to guess your own thoughts, that's meditation, a cultivation technique from the Far East." 720. Have you considered the wedding scene? Legilimency, using magic to extend the caster's perception into another person's mind, studying Kleck's emotions, memories, even thoughts from the feedback of that perception. Academics have not officially labeled legilimency as dark arts, but to most witches and wizards it is undeniably sinister. Beginners practicing legilimency should not expect the target's mind to open like a book or a photo album. The brain and the soul are the most mysterious parts of a person. They won't surrender themselves simply because you mutter an incantation and wave a wand. Legilimency is not a pensieve, it's a ritual. To cast it, you must find a way to breach the other person's defenses. You may have experienced something similar, being scrutinized by a stern elder or a severe parent and feeling as though their eyes saw right through you. That is a technique. Make the other party doubt themselves, let their emotions waver, and a weakness will show. Both the magical world and Muggle society say the eyes are the windows to the soul. In most cases, legilimens choose gaze as a medium, extending their magical perception during eye contact, entering the other person's mind through the eyes. Harry held his teacup with both hands and listened, though his gaze was distant. Faces flashed through his head. Dumbledore's deep blue eyes, always inscrutable. Snape's black eyes, cold and empty. Voldemort's slit pupils, like venomous snakes poised to strike. Had Dumbledore used legilimency on him? He couldn't be sure. Snape and Voldemort had, definitively. Harry's mind drifted to the underground occlumency lessons. He could still feel Snape's gaze drilling into him, and how those buried embarrassing memories had been dragged up. Once, during a practice session, he had slammed a shield charm across Snape's attempt. He remembered a foreign sensation, his own gaze extending like a thread of magic into another space, and memories floating past like soap bubbles. Closing your eyes and zoning out won't work, Loren's voice brought him back. Penetrating the other person's mind is only the first step. Emotions are complex, memories chaotic, thoughts deep and varied. No one knows exactly what you'll find. If you want specific information, you must guide it. Slowly, Harry realized that when he'd accidentally glimpsed Snape's memories of his parents, it must have been the professor subtly guiding him, revealing things in a controlled way. He blinked, tried to summon that peculiar feeling of directing legilimency, and quietly pushed a thin strand of awareness from his eyes. It fizzled almost instantly. The movement that came so naturally during Snape's practice, light as breathing, perfectly timed, was gone. His attempt dispersed as soon as it left him. His eyes stung. Harry ducked his head and drank his tea in silence. A crystalline blue light gleamed in Loren's eyes. He shifted his gaze as if uninterested. It's tedious at first. You must be patient. Try more and you'll get the hang of it. Take your glasses off when you practice. It helps the magic reach out. Harry didn't know that his roommate, skilled at legilimency and magical perception, had already seen through his hesitation. Harry meant no ill will. The lesson had reached a point where he was naturally curious. He took his glasses off. His vision blurred, but he didn't mind. He blinked twice and tried again, guiding the magic through his eyes toward Loren. In the blur, a white flash opened, and this time his perception slipped into Loren's gaze. The penetration met no resistance. It flowed, invaded, and hovered, twisting and probing like a snake and spreading like water. Clusters of misted light drifted through his awareness. So easy. Harry felt a strange echo of one of Snape's old remarks. Loren's mind was so open it could almost let a hippogriff fly through. Entering was only the first step. Now he had to guide what he wanted to see. Trying to sound casual, Harry raised an eyebrow. Out of curiosity, Loren, can I ask you something? Go ahead. Loren sat opposite, balancing a small hand mirror. He hooked his pinky around the handle and tapped it. The mirror rose on a levitation charm and floated before Harry while Loren sipped his tea. Harry cleared his throat. What's the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to you? Let me think. Loren's tone was meant to tease. Before Harry could savor his anticipation, Loren tilted his head. What about you, Harry? What's your most embarrassing moment? I need to think about that too. That bought Harry a little time. He could feel the memory light around his perceptions stirring. Soap bubble mists drifted closer. Sorry, he thought. This isn't right, but I'm too curious. I promise I'll only look for a moment. He pushed his awareness toward the drifting images. Scenes flashed. Being chased up a tree by Fang and not daring to come down until dark. Being called on in the first potions lesson and having no answer. Watching Cho Chang cling to Cedric after a match. Ginny meeting his gaze shyly, then stepping forward, kissing him, and him recoiling in fright. As if snapped awake, Harry jerked his hand away and knocked his teacup. Tea spilled across his lap. Somehow, despite his legilimency working, he hadn't expected to relive those particular embarrassments. He grabbed a handkerchief and scrubbed at his trousers and hands. Out of the corner of his eye, he thought he saw something flash past. He looked up to find Loren calmly sipping his tea. Is the tea too hot? Loren asked, unruffled. Harry's cheeks burned. He couldn't meet Loren's eyes. Nah, Loren suppressed a smile. Oh, while we're on the subject, he said casually. Have you ever imagined your wedding? Wedding? I don't know. Something like Sirius's wedding, or Mrs. Weasley arranging it. Why do you ask? No reason. I'm just curious. Loren took another sip. Have you thought of a modern ceremony? On a lawn, all your friends and family gathered, and a big screen showing all the moments between you and Ginny? Sounds nice. I'll handle that part when the time comes, Loren said lightly. Thank you, Loren. Harry was touched. No problem. Loren glanced away. By the way, I wonder how Bill and Fleur's wedding plans are going. I hope it'll be at Christmas. Ancient Runes classroom. Professor Babbling's skirts whispered across the floor. Quills scratched parchment in neat, rapid strokes. The advanced runes exam had stepped up in difficulty. No longer mere translation, now the students had to write short essays based on given themes and keywords, testing not just vocabulary, but the understanding of the age the runes came from. Hermione stared at the prompts. The rune for 9 could mean a number, the Hydra, or abstract classical ideas. There was a lot to say, and she had to judge how much detail fit the minimum and maximum word counts. Time was short. She sketched an outline and tightened it again and again until the essay fit the required range. Only then did she breathe. 2 hours passed. The bell sounded. Hermione put down her quill, flipped through her answers to ensure no student details were missing, no numbers mismatched, and that the paper was clean. She jotted down a few lingering doubts and then handed in her exam. She felt a pleasant relief. Packing up, she bowed to Professor Babbling and set out for the staircase. Hermione, wait! Professor Babbling, dressed in magenta and a small bag that rattled as if packed with extension charms, had checked papers while invigilating. I looked at your paper, she said as they walked shoulder to shoulder, and there were 2 ambiguities in translation you didn't resolve, and 2 incorrect verb usages in grammar. Still, this exam was difficult. You should still be top of the class. Professor Babbling, don't ask where exactly you erred. I can't remember. She wagged a finger indulgently. Teasing the brightest student was fun. They had a rapport beyond the usual professor and pupil formality. They had once explored a pyramid to try to lift a family curse, and Hermione had acted as a teaching assistant for the class at times. The professor enjoyed this closeness. Oh, one more thing I need your help with. I won't help you grade papers. What an accusation. I'm not that irresponsible. Professor Babbling adopted a mock-offended air. I want you to deliver a message to your young wizard. What message? The Egypt Alchemical Research Center has invited him to join them. Egypt Alchemical Research Center? Hermione raised an eyebrow. Don't imagine it's some isolated castle. Alchemists work worldwide, and the commotion around Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, protective suits, communicators, has been full of breakthroughs in applied alchemy. Professor Babbling paused, remembering. I hear Beauxbatons has interest too. As Mr. Nicholas Flamel's alma mater, Beauxbatons' governors are connected to the Egypt Center. There's been some talk about invitations. Hermione nodded, thinking, this is just an informal message then? A formal letter will come next year? Yes, we'll sort out the specifics then. They chatted until parting, though Hermione still didn't know which exact questions she'd missed. She sighed and headed for the common room. The fat lady's portrait looked flushed and a little foggy-eyed. Hermione could smell a faint trace of wine. The portrait had solemnly announced a vow to stop drinking after the Christmas holidays. She had even changed the portrait password. Yet here she was, back on the monk's wine. Hermione thought she should mention it to Professor McGonagall, but shrugged it off as Neville and Parvati's concern. All exams were over, and dinner was still a little way off. The common room buzzed with students. Hermione took a window seat and glanced across the room. 2 figures were sitting very close, gazing intently at each other. One was Harry, glasses off. The other was Ron, not Ginny. They sat face to face, their reflections mirrored in one another's pupils, brows slightly furrowed, expressions concentrated. Hermione's first reaction was a dramatic hiss. Then she blinked and hurried over to Loren at the next table. What are they doing? Where's Ginny? Don't jump to conclusions, Loren said. They're just having a deep stare, not practicing legilimency.